welcome this morning to the second day of our 68th Annual New Mexico Water Conference. And I'm starting just a little early so we can give our headliner, Mike Hammond, the state engineer, time to get started right at 9 here. And quick bio, Mike Hammond served as the governor's state water advisor prior to becoming New Mexico state engineer in 2022. He previously served as chief engineer and chief executive officer for Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District. And prior to that, he worked for 17 years at the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. He also worked for the Interstate Stream Commission and City of Santa Fe, and as we heard yesterday, Hickory Apache Nation. So we are very pleased and honored to start the day with Mike Hammond, New Mexico State Engineer.
Well, good morning, everyone. Ooh, some bright lights. I want to thank Sam and his crew with WRRI putting this great program together. I'm extremely impressed. I was able to listen in on a lot of the presentations yesterday, and very, very good and very well presented, and got a lot of great people, great experts in this state working on very important water issues. And I also want to start with a show of hands. How many students are in the room here this morning? All right. How many of you are getting very excited about a career in water and natural resources? Non-committal, I know, I understand. You got to get through your graduate studies and whatever, but I'm certainly hopeful that things that I say promote the agency so that you'll take a look at us. We certainly are hiring. We actually had, with the work of my water resource allocation programs manager, John Romero, the work that he's been doing to recruit new folks into our agency. We had 24 internships this last year, and hopefully some of those folks liked what they did with us, and they'll come back and join our team. We certainly need all the help that we can get with a lot of up-and-coming, bright, passionate water and natural resource students and career enthusiasts. So I want to encourage you to look close at our agency when you make your decisions for your career choices. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our agency. A lot of folks get a little confused about the difference between the state engineer and the Interstate Stream Commission and all that. I just wanted to just kind of share with you. I have to admit that I used to be a little confused at times myself when I was outside the agency about what was, what was going on decision-making wise within the agency. But after being with an insider for the past couple of years, I've really grown to a tremendous amount of respect for the team that we have, the hard work that they do, and the mission itself. I had tremendous respect for the agency before I joined it, but it's grown immensely since. And I've realized that my number one job as tenure as a state engineer is to make sure that I do everything I can to make sure that all the great people that work in the agency has the resources that they need, both on the staffing and the funding side, that they need to effectuate our base mission, which is extremely broad, and our growing mission that I'll talk a little bit about here with you this morning. But again, we have 4 major programs in our agency. I mentioned the Water Resource Allocation Program. That's our Water Rights Administration group, and that's our biggest staffing group. We have 7 district offices across the state that work with all of our water users of many different types of all, just fundamentally every drop of water that gets used in the state of New Mexico whether it's groundwater or surface water, and in some cases effluent water or whatever the case may be, needs a permit from the state engineer's office. And that permitting process can be quite onerous, depending on the circumstances of the particular permit application and all the different situations that our very creative water users bring to our agency for administration. You know, we're the second most arid state in the nation, and scarcity drives innovation. Scarcity can drive conflict. And our agency in the RAP, and then also the litigation and adjudication program, which is, I think, our second largest group, a bunch of very talented lawyers, headed by Nat Chakeris, who's my general counsel, who you'll hear from later today on the Texas v. New Mexico litigation update. We have an incredible team there. And if you're thinking about law school, you students, we'd also like you to consider our agency along that line as well. And so, you know, permitting and conflict resolution is a big part of our regulatory side of the agency. But we want to make sure that if a water user has a valid water right, we want to make sure that water user can put that water to, quote, beneficial use, which is the standard of evaluating a water right. And it's the limit of the water right. And then once that limit is determined, then that water right becomes fungible in this context that it can be transferred and other people can use that right for various things. And we heard an interesting concept that's been growing is the water leasing activity. And you heard of a really great one that the Hickory Apache Nation has engaged in with the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission and the Nature Conservancy to actually have, quote, in-stream flow, which is a growing interest in the realm of public welfare. So we also have to evaluate our permits on the basis of public welfare. And public welfare is a broad term, and it's in sort of evolution of definition as conditions arise. And that's what's great about the water resource management business is you know, you have your lanes of various things that constitutionally you have to do, statutorily you have to do, but there's also what I find with the state engineer is because of, quote, his authority. And when they talk about the state engineer in our agency, it's actually a big bunch of people. It's not just me. I mean, I'm the ultimate arbitrator, decision maker in a lot of cases. But the state engineer is the whole infrastructure of the Water Rights Administration Group and the legal team behind that. So we are the state engineer. And as conditions come to us, we have flexibility to adjust based on, you know, current conditions. We also have a new statutory regulation authority that allows for what they call alternative water rights administration, which is a method to supplant the formal adjudication process. And we've done a number of adjudications, and I can really get in the weeds on that stuff, but basically what an adjudication does is it looks at an entire basin and it evaluates the priorities of the water rights, because we're a prior appropriation state. So first in time, first in right. So everybody has a priority date associated when they first started using water, diverting it from a stream or from a well or whatever. And all of those things are evaluated, and ultimately you get your right adjudicated in relation to other people's water rights in that same basin. So that's how a normal adjudication unfolds. And if the basin has Native American claims within it of any kind, that the approach that we are taking is we need to resolve that claim legally in concert with the United States, who has the trust responsibility for each of the tribes, 23 tribes in New Mexico that have a time immemorial or prior and paramount water right that has to be quantified in the court relative to state water rights, so that you can then complete the adjudication of the other parties that have more junior rights to those particular senior rights. So all of that works together. It can be very complicated, take years. You know, the Amit case started in the 1960s and finally has been resolved. So these things are very difficult, but in our agency, we've taken a very proactive approach to settling Indian water rights claims. We've done two. We've actually completed four during my tenure here, but two are actually in Congress right now to get the legislation necessary to complete the Rio Jemez and the Rio San Jose adjudications there. And the state part of that is we represent the non-Pueblo, non-tribal interests in those basins to make sure that they have what they need to implement the settlement. So that's the general process that we're going through on that side. It also has a compact implication in a lot of our basins: San Juan Basin, Rio Grande Basin, Canadian Basin, the Pecos Basin, and some smaller Canadian and others that are out there. There's a compact, interstate compact, because these streams flow from out of state into New Mexico in some cases, and then back out to other states. So we have these compacts that have been negotiated over time, and you heard a lot about the Colorado River Compact yesterday. The Rio Grande Compact is a three-state compact, and you'll hear about litigation on that from Nat later. But that's the wheelhouse of the Interstate Stream Commission. They manage all of the compacts. I sit as secretary on the Interstate Stream Commission as a connection to the state engineer, and I also serve as the compact commissioner for the Rio Grande Compact, and a small one too on the Costilla River, which is a fun one to do because it's way up in the beautiful northern New Mexico mountains, is where we usually go and meet to discuss the Costilla River Compact on an annual basis with my fellow Colorado Compact Commissioner. And I would say that compacts really are what binds states together that are in them, and they can also be tension among states, and you'll hear more about that later. But the Interstate Stream Commission also is the water development agency of our organization. They work on making sure that within the rules of the compact, that the water that's available to New Mexico is on a path for full development. And you've heard about where we stand in the San Juan River on that front from Rolf and Esteban yesterday, and I'd like to say, Rolf, you did a great job, and you all could see why we miss him. He's a wealth of information and a resource to the agency, and we hope we can tap into it later when you kind of get your retirement feet under you down the road, Rolf. But the relationship there is unique in that sometimes it appears that the Interstate Stream Commission is its own independent agency, but really it's under the umbrella of the Office of the State Engineer, and that's true for budgeting and policy issues associated with things we got to do in the state legislature and with the governor's office, and I'll talk about that here in a minute. But the mission has grown there too. At least 4 of the basins I mentioned that have compacts on them have endangered species issues on them. And the Interstate Stream Commission does a lot of work with Grace Haggerty. She does a lot of work for us on habitat development, trying to comply with BO conditions. We have lots of compliance matters, particularly on the Pecos and the Rio Grande. We're participants in the San Juan River Recovery Program that have 2 endangered fish there that are making progress, actually on the path to recovery, I believe. So so those investments do pay off. And then we have a program support group that really is the glue that keeps us all together, managing our contracts and our budgets and our personnel and all that stuff. And that's an incredibly important job in state government. You got to always have your I's dotted and T's crossed in state government. So, but don't let the bureaucracy of government scare you all away from coming to join our agency. We help. We don't overload our interns and our new employees with a bunch of bureaucracy. We'll leave that to me. I'll take care of it for you. Some of the things that we are aware of, you heard a lot about. We have some great work that the ISC commissioned from our Leap Ahead analysis, which is the award-winning climate report that our scientists from New Mexico Tech and our climatologists and engineer from New Mexico State and others contributed to this incredible, eye-opening climate impact document. You saw on the maps that the Southwest is going to get drier. What? You know, it's unfair, right? The Southwest is going to get drier. The place that already has water is going to get wetter. What's the deal with that? That's kind of that just seems really, really unfair. Gosh darn it. But the truth of climate modeling and observations since the 1980s, myself being in this business since then, really illustrates that our trajectory is more aridification in the state of New Mexico. So the number one job that we all have collectively is to prepare our state for less surface water in particular. We may see more intense monsoonal events that we need to prepare for and take full advantage of those monsoons while they're falling on our state and try not to let them leave our state. We have a requirement actually to do that down on the lower Rio Grande, because if we get a flow of 1,000 with our new consent decree that you'll hear about later, if we have a flow of 1,000 CFS or more going past the gauge at the Texas border, New Mexico doesn't get any credit for whatever flows above 1,000 CFS. And if you know anything about the flashy storm events that happen down there, you can see 10, 15,000 CFS at times that flash down through that valley and cause a lot of damage to property and river beds and bridges and various things while that's going on. But the downside for New Mexico is we do not get credit for our compact delivery to Texas under that scenario. So it's incumbent upon us to think about that, think about our infrastructure, think about in real substantive ways how we can prepare ourselves proactively instead of reactively to the changing climatic conditions that we know are already upon us. It's no secret. So when I was at the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District, I was there for 7 years. 5 of the 7 years we had horrible flood in the Belen area because of monsoon events. We finally got an NRCS project to actually capture some of that and hold it once it's constructed at 100% federal dollars, I might add, to hold that water and put it back in the system or recharge it into the aquifer, something creative. Keep it, use it, and help offset the surface water from a snowmelt runoff infrastructure perspective that we've developed over the last century. Start to rethink that. Obviously, we're going to continue to still get some snowmelt runoff, but it's going to be kind of on a declining. And we heard a question yesterday about the hydrograph. The hydrograph is changing. certainly is. There's the higher peak runoffs and a shorter period of time that snow melt will be running off. And our infrastructure isn't particularly well designed to fully capitalize on that at the moment either. So we've got to think through that stuff and plan. And we have quite a bit of opportunities that you'll hear about right after I leave the stage at the federal side. But I wanted to share a little bit about where we are on the state side. And I'll drill into, since this has got a Colorado River focus, I think, what's great about the Colorado River water that we bring into the Middle Valley is it can be wholly consumed. And you heard about return flow projects and various things that people are working on. But the whole concept that most I would say capable communities can do, the larger municipalities and water settlements and federal dollars coming into our state, like for the Ute, the Eastern New Mexico Water Utility Authority will be taking water from the ISC Ute Reservoir as a surface water supply to supplement or to be the primary source of water ultimately for multiple communities and the Cannon Air Force Base out on the eastern side of the plains where the Ogallala aquifer is dramatically falling due to heavy pumping. And there's lots of creative things going on there on land fallowing and various things that are trying to slow the decline of the aquifer while this pipeline gets built. But the idea is that if you optimize the surface water, you can, and begin to preserve the groundwater in those regions that have been tapped. Humans are interesting critters. The cheapest supply is where we go first, right? So let's tap that groundwater, let's pump it to oblivion, let's do whatever, right? So we can't do that anymore. We've got to preserve. That's the long-term savings account is our aquifers. Let's use the daily checking account of surface water, like the city of Santa Fe, Albuquerque, Bernalillo County Water Utility Authority made major investments to use the surface water instead of using San Juan Chama water as a one-time offset for their groundwater impacts. Now they can divert that San Juan Chama water, which is imported into the Rio Grande. It has no water right impact to other native water rights holders. It's on top of the entire native supply. If that can be used proactively through return flow projects and other things to extend that surface water supply as far into the future as you possibly can as your day-to-day checking account, and then just continue to let the groundwater systems recharge and build back up and have that as we lose 25% of our surface water. We've done some very good things with stormwater and our aquifers to actually put us in a good position to survive and prosper as our aridification moves forward into the future. So that's really the big picture strategy. There's lots of projects, lots of issues, lots of legislative agendas or initiatives and funding opportunities that we have. So challenges and shortages, water shortages produces innovation and collaboration. And that's what the regional water planning program is going to be a cornerstone for our agency through the ISC to get the regions rallied around their specific issues and to have them wrestle with that and then bring forward their plans and their priorities to the legislature, to the agencies, to actually implement a very sustainable and reliable water future in the context of increasing aridification in our state. So that's what the governor asked me to work on as the state engineer. We certainly were on it already when I joined the team, but we're certainly putting that on hyperdrive. And I'd like to give a shout out to uh, a report that many of you know about, but I want to make sure you have an opportunity to look at it if you don't know about it. It's Facing New Mexico's 21st Century Water Challenges. It was a report put together by the New Mexico Water Policy and Infrastructure Task Force that the governor authorized me to form. We got 20 experts from around the state, citizen water users from all walks of water use life, and also 9 agency staff, key agency staff participated from across our state government, including our Indian Affairs Department and our finance group, as well as 13 legislative advisors developed 17 recommendations for the legislature to consider and the governor back just prior to last session, and it was very successful. That's where the Regional Water Planning Act came from, was that session. There's also a systems regionalization bill that was passed, Senate Bill 1, that will allow smaller communities that don't have the resources that the larger communities have in our state to regionalize from a rate-based perspective and maybe even system perspective, but to optimize their resources. We have a horrible problem in this state with capacity at all levels of government. We're included. And we continue to ask for additional resources for our agency to, address our new mission. And we've got great support from the governor's office and the legislature the last session, and we think we'll get great support this session. But the idea is we got to get people out on the ground with our smaller communities to give them the advantages that we have with the largesse of state funding and federal funding, because managing a federal grant, if anybody's ever done that, it's onerous and you gotta know what you're doing. And if you don't have that capacity, you're gonna be fearful to even apply for the grants. But there's tons of money out there. We gotta figure out how to capitalize on it. The legislature knows that. And so they're trying to put together pots of money now that they have great oil and gas revenues coming into the state. We have probably the largest budget surplus we've enjoyed ever in our history. And they're having trouble getting that money out in capital outlay projects just because there's not enough capacity at the local governments to manage the funds. There's not enough contractors and engineering firms and grant managers and all that. So that's right now there's kind of a bottleneck, but we're going to solve that problem. We're going to crack that nut. We're going to get you younger students into the mix to help us, put this money effectively on the ground and prepare New Mexico for the long term. That's our number one strategy. I also wear a hat as the chair of the Water Trust Board, and we had a record request for funding. We have about $130 million annually to dole out for our mostly drinking water programs, but there's wastewater and other things in that authority there. But we got nearly $300 million worth of requests this year. So that's telling you the need is there, and that's state money that can be leveraged against federal grants that you'll hear about here in a few minutes. But we have this great opportunity to bridge our state forward to avoid major conflicts on the Colorado River that you heard a lot about. 2026 is the year where we have to have a new operating plan for the river there. And if we can't avoid that conflict, we're going to have issues. But the funding that's coming forth on the federal side right now is bridging some gaps that will allow some time for folks to adjust to lower elevations at Lake Powell and Lake Mead, and to allow for hopefully another great El Nino season is what they're predicting will help cushion the system a little bit longer so we can get through putting the new guidelines forward at the 7-state and U.S. level, so that we do have a manageable process that will still allow for some upper basin state development and tribal water use development, while there's enough water reserved for the higher priority uses, I guess you'd call it, in the lower basin states of California, Arizona, and Nevada. So it's a daunting challenge in that regard, but we have a great team representing New Mexico on that group. We hope that we can avoid major litigation with the heavyweights of Colorado and Arizona. But someone said we have 8 senators to 6, so maybe that's maybe that's going to be a beneficial component to the way things develop on the Colorado River. Just one more comment, and then I'll have them click to my final slide at a beautiful little diversion point. You can see the head gates. You can see some rock work that's been done, maybe to create ponds and pools off of this beautiful little stream coming out of that canyon. We've got multiple challenges, but challenges and scarcity, like I said earlier, drives innovation. It also drives creativity from the standpoint of engagement and negotiations with all the water parties. The tendency initially when your ox is getting gored from a water user perspective is to, draw back and threaten litigation or whatever. But I think we're all learning that we're in this together, and if we can't figure it out in a collaborative environment, the litigation will just drive us, the scarce resources, financial resources, or in some cases the abundant resources we have now, will drive us into a less useful litigation process. But also, when litigation is threatened, people draw back and don't engage, and so the status quo lives on. And we can't afford any more time on the status quo, folks. So that's what this slide says, really at all levels. It's really time to take action toward building a resilient water future. And again, I want to invite all of our young students in the room to come join in on the fun. Thank you very much. Am I holding for any questions, Sam? Or?
We have time for a couple. Thanks, Mike.
There we go. Thank you. My question is, you mentioned the leap ahead, and I think they indicate maybe 25% shortage of surface water in the future. So conservation has been and will be part of our toolbox to address that. So my question is, in your opinion, does the use it or lose it rule interfere with conservation? And if so, is there anything that we could maybe do to not have that get in our way?
That comes up a lot. When I was at the Middle River Grand Conservancy District, there was a myth there that if you didn't divert your water out onto a patch of weeds, you're going to lose your water right. So that's kind of at the base level, right, of an irrigator in a system. That they feel like there are formal processes in state law, abandonment and forfeiture procedures, and we do use those on occasion, and that usually comes up when somebody's trying to transfer a water right that hasn't been used for a long time. that's when we take a look at that. But we're not actively, I mean, we can't. We don't have the staff to even enforce the basic rules of well drilling and various things across the state. We're not actively seeking, and there's a notice procedure too that's built into, if we are going to challenge somebody's water right, they need to be notified. They have due process. So that's kind of a myth a little bit too, that use it or lose it. It's quite a lengthy process, even if we were to go after it. But like I said, though, if there's some folks that are very creative in the way that they seek to utilize their water rights and to, you know, maybe profit on some sort of new endeavor like cannabis growing or something like that that's going on in our state right now, you see a lot of creative applications, and we catch them there. But it's only because they're trying to move that right somewhere. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't even look at it. But I want to get back to your question. We encourage conservation, and if you enroll in a conservation program of any kind, the state engineer will not count that time against the use of your water. You know, your beneficial use of it, because it's being beneficially used through some sort of application process. You lease it to somebody, or, you know, whatever. You enroll it in maybe a grand, irrigation fallowing program. We have a big one we just completed, or in the process of completing, down on the lower Rio Grande. And that's one of the questions they ask. If I fallow my land for 2 years, am I in trouble with my water right? No, sir. It's a benefit to the state for you to not pump that groundwater. So you're going to continue to recognize that right. And it's also true of municipalities. They have massive conservation programs and whatnot. It fits into their portfolio of their water rights, and they own that. They have them reserved for 40 years under their permit applications. So we're not, you know, state engineer isn't going to go to them and say, hey, you know, you're going to have to downsize your portfolio, but it does allow them to buy time, right? If they have to acquire water rights under their permit, like Rio Rancho or somebody, the conservation programs they implement pushes that need farther out into the future. So, but I'd like to say too that in our state, utility authority, city of Santa Fe, and definitely the city of Las Vegas are some of the lowest per capita water users in the Southwest. So we are doing our part, and that's the thing that we got to do too. It's collectively across all sectors of water use, is to conserve and manage. And I think there's going to be a big shift in agricultural economy over time that will shift water use maybe into maybe a little away from the more flood irrigation concepts into more of a drip and pressurized system concepts. You're already seeing that a lot throughout the Southwest, a little bit in New Mexico, and that may not, you know, there's the jury's out about whether that actually saves water or not, but the higher dollar crops that benefit from that type of system are economically beneficial for folks to go in that direction. And we'll see more and more of that. We're also going to be looking at brackish water development and various things like that has a very small, you know, niche right now for industrial development and possibly high-end agricultural use in a greenhouse environment. You know, those kinds of desalination and effluent treatment and reuse, maybe produced water fits into that equation too. So all of that innovation is starting to really start to develop. And we play a role in some of it, and some of it we don't, as our agency. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Okay, that was great. Thank you very much for kicking off our day with a lot of big picture, great visions there. So We have a couple speakers here. I'm going to start out introducing Mike Benning. Has served as lead project coordinator with Reclamation's Upper Colorado Basin region since 2023. He matches projects with available funding and especially related to bipartisan infrastructure law. Provides expertise in program management, financial management, public outreach for reclamation stakeholders and partners to get the most out of their funding. And we have Dagmar Llewellyn. She's consulted and managed water resources projects domestically and internationally for 38 years. Currently serves as planning program lead for Reclamation's Upper Colorado Basin region, where her work focuses on water, river, environmental management in the Rio Grande and Colorado basins and the Great Basin. And I just want to take this chance to also thank Dagmar for her role on the Water Conference Advisory Committee and the whole Water Conference Advisory Committee, because these people volunteer their time to identify key topics. The Colorado was selected this year, and identify the speakers. So thank you, Dagmar, and the whole Water Conference Advisory Committee. Yay. Okay, the floor is yours.
I kept hearing about how bright the lights were up here, and yes, they are. I'm guessing it's so that if I can't see the audience, then I'm not scared of the audience, right? So let me introduce myself. I'm Mike Benning. I'm actually a newbie to what I'm going to call the water world. My background is actually the last several years I worked with the Air Force up at Hill Air Force Base, managing programs and projects for them, finding funding and program management for sustaining their aircraft as well as the aircraft of some of our international partners. For my midlife crisis, a few years back, I started a land survey degree program, went out and got the land survey degree and thought, how am I going to apply this? And I'm kind of talking to the students now, how am I going to apply this degree that I have? And also this background I have in program management. And so started looking for positions and found a position with the Bureau of Reclamation, kind of playing matchmaker. It ties really well to my background of finding funding for aircraft sustainment programs, but now I'm finding funds for sustainment programs for the Bureau of Reclamation. So to you students out there, please consider positions with the federal government. To steal a little bit of Mike's thunder, we don't want all of you going to the local and state agencies. Please consider the feds as well. So with that, let me go into our next. Well, actually, let me continue a little bit more with my story. As I tell people that I'm working for the Bureau of Reclamation, a lot of people don't know what that is. They say, the Bureau, what? Oh, you're reclaiming water. Not quite. The original purpose of the Bureau of Reclamation was to reclaim the land of the arid West through the management of water, right? Now I'll go to my next slide. And that is to really hit on Reclamation's current goals. The biggest one being working with partners, working in partnership with states, tribes, water and power customers, and others to seek creative solutions to Western water issues. So now that we've spent so much time building dams and reservoirs and canals and all this infrastructure for the last century trying to reclaim the land, now how are we going to appropriately use those water resources to maintain what we've now attracted to the arid West? As I mentioned, my job is to match projects to funding. We have two main sources of funding right now. The Congress recently passed a couple of pieces of legislation. First is called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and the next is called the Inflation Reduction Act. And the two big questions that Dagmar and I wanted to hit today, the so what questions for you all, is why do I care about BIL and IRA? And then the second is how can reclamation's funding programs, which these two are, how can those programs, including the Water Smart program, help your organization access funding to improve water management? The main strategic objectives of BIL and IRA are to help you do that. They increase water reliability and resilience. They support racial and economic equity. Hopefully they're helping modernize infrastructure, and I'd like to share a little story about that. Some of you participated in our tour that we did to NM WRRI Reservoir on Tuesday. And while we were participating in that tour, one of the mayordomos there who was giving the tour, Mike Lujan, he says to us, he says, man, we've really got a lot of problems here. Our infrastructure is just so old. You know, it was built back in the 1970s. And one of our engineers is like, that's not really old when you consider some of the many other facilities that reclamation helped fund go back to the 40s, the 30s, the 20s, even earlier than that. So we're trying to find ways to modernize that infrastructure within the system. We're also trying to enhance water conservation, ecosystems, and we've heard a lot about climate change lately. So we're really looking for ways to tackle the climate resilience questions that are out there. How can we make this system resilient for all of the issues that are popping up with climate change? BIL, our first act that we're talking about, it provides a lot of funds to reclamation and its partners so that we can improve water infrastructure. This chart here, what it does is it tries to give you a breakdown. BIL set aside $8.3 billion of funds for Bureau of Reclamation to administer. A big chunk of that, your orange chunk that we're looking at right there, it's a hybrid of internal applications, so only people within reclamation or only groups within reclamation can apply for it and say, hey, I got this project that needs to happen. But it's a hybrid, that orange group, of internal and external. And external should be all of you. The state agencies, the local irrigation districts, tribes as well. All of these entities are available to, or eligible to participate in this program. The blue section there on this chart, which equates to about $2.2 billion of that total 8.3, that is strictly for you all to apply for. We're going to get into a little bit more of what these programs are that you can apply for. Something to be aware of, these programs are written as laws. And so it is somewhat defined, the requirements for participation, the eligibility for participation, and what you can spend those funds on. So we'll get into these a little bit here. I'll start off by looking at the first three, which I bring to your attention so you can be aware of, but want you to understand that they probably aren't going to apply to you as much. The first one is called our Aging Infrastructure Rehabilitation Account. Those are items, as I mentioned, like with the NM WRRI example, you have facilities that are years and years old that need extraordinary maintenance. There's work that needs to be done that's been put aside because there hasn't been funding for it. And so Congress recognized that, and they said, hey, we want to get some funds out there so that entities can provide or can have that funding that will provide them what they need to pay for these extraordinary maintenance items that are out there. The one thing with that is that, or actually two things. First of all, you have to be what's considered transferred work or a reserved work. So, some of that is reclamation internally can apply for those funds, but also if, say, using NM WRRI for an example, that's a facility that reclamation built, but we transferred operations and maintenance of that facility over to the Powake Valley Irrigation District for them to do. And so it was transferred to them even though we're retaining title. And And so they're able to apply for this aging infrastructure work as one of our partners in that situation. So if you're part of a transferred work organization, this may be something that you want to look at for providing immediate funds to get extraordinary maintenance done. The one thing to consider, though, if you're looking at this, is all of these funds coming out of here is considered a loan. It can be a long-term loan that you pay back over 30 years. They're even considering 50-year options, but it is a loan, so you need to be aware that there is a repayment obligation. Next up is our Safety of Dams program. That's more of an internal proposal structure there, and they've actually pre-identified what they're going to spend that money on. So I wouldn't worry too much about Safety of Dams. Similar for support of rural water systems. There's, I believe, 7 projects throughout the nation that have been identified as the recipients of this $1 billion that's available. 2 of them actually are within New Mexico, the first one being the Eastern New Mexico water system that's being worked on for the communities out there. And the other that qualified under this is the Navajo Gallup system. So those are the 2 programs in New Mexico that are going to be seeing funding under those. Our next set of items here, most of the rest of this list, though, are things that you should be aware of, things that you should be thinking about and thinking, how can I participate in these? Many of these are administered under a program that Dagmar oversees, which is called our Water Smart program. So she's going to get into some of the more details about how you can apply for these, but they are water recycling and reuse. The folks from Santa Fe yesterday, they talked about their pipeline that they're looking to install. And as they were speaking about that, I was thinking, gee, I wonder if they're going to apply for maybe funding under this water recycling and reuse program. It's an option for them to consider. Other options, desalination. How are we going to take advantage of the water that's there but has too much salinity? What kind of facilities can we construct that can take out that salinity and give us potable water? Watershed management, a lot of that is for starting groups that will come together and come up with watershed management plans as well as projects. Water Smart grants, we've got $400 million for that. Water storage, groundwater storage, and conveyance. This program is actually split into 2 different parts. What we're considering there is what we're calling small storage programs. And those are programs that are 200 acre feet of water storage or conveyance, up to 30,000 acre feet of water storage. Those are considered small projects. Over 30,000 feet is what we're considering more your traditional or large storage projects. But we have programs for funding those for the entities that are looking at those type of systems. Next up, we have aquatic ecosystem restoration, also multi-benefit watershed management, and then we have Colorado drought contingency planning. Something I want you all to be aware of, though, is that these do have requirements or eligibility things that must be met. If you're a state agency, a local agency, an irrigation district, or someone else who has water delivery authority or power delivery authority, then you can apply for these. The other case where you might see is that sometimes you get a nonprofit organization who would like to apply as well, or a university who might want to be involved as well. They are able to participate as long as they're partnered with one of those other entities that I previously mentioned. So your state, your local, your tribal, people like that. Next up is our second program, which is called the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA. It provides funds for projects that are more related to tackling climate change and your resource security. First up, the biggest chunk of all of that was $4 billion, or at this point 3.5, that was set aside for the Colorado River Basin. Congress recognized the need to put a lot of funds there so that they could conserve the source of water that provides so much to the Southwest. That, as well as the next one down, the other river basins, which encompasses your things like the Rio Grande, or if you're up in Oregon, the Klamath, or if you're in California, the Sacramento and San Joaquin. We all have to compete for $500 million that falls into that other basins category. Those two sections, though, what they're really looking for with the Colorado River and the other river basins is they're looking for the voluntary conservation efforts that they can fund. We've heard fallowing mentioned a couple times. That's certainly an option for voluntary conservation. Another potential source of voluntary conservation is crop switching. Sure, there's plenty others out there, but those are some of your examples. So we're looking to fund items like that with these two funds, and we're also looking to fund your ecosystem restoration projects with that. Things that are going to make the general river basins in those areas more resilient to climate change. And so right now, we're going through processes establishing these programs. I tout them right now, but with the one caveat is that they're still in development. So we will be getting more information out in terms of what specific projects are available or that we're considering. How do you actually apply for those funds? What are the timelines? All those details still working out, but we will be getting information out here in the very near future. Next up, we have domestic water supply projects for disadvantaged communities. We've got $550 million there. The disadvantaged communities, there's a web page that you can go to, and I'm sorry I didn't put the link here, but it's an environmental justice and disadvantaged community website that the administration has put out that essentially maps out the whole country, and you can click on your specific area, and based on how it has been identified will tell you if it's disadvantaged or not. Most of New Mexico does fall into that disadvantaged community category. And one thing to be aware of is Native American communities are automatically considered disadvantaged, so they can automatically apply for those funds. Next up under IRA, we have solar panels over canals, looking for ways to not only get your water more efficiently, but how can we tap into that as another source of something for the economy? So is it feasible to put solar panels over canals? Is that an option for us to do? Those tend to be areas that are fairly well maintained and cleared and usually wide open to the sun. Can we take advantage of that sun that shines on that area and put panels there? And then next up, there's a program for emergency drought relief for tribes, $12.5 million that we are trying to get out there to aid tribes with their drought resiliency projects. It goes specifically to them. Again, another project that's in development, and we will have more information in the near future. Give a little breakout there just in terms of the pie chart, in terms of how much goes to each of these programs. I realize I'm here representing reclamation, but we do keep track of a lot of the things that other agencies out there are doing. We actually partner with them in data calls where we're requesting proposals and things like that. So I just want you to be aware of some of the other agencies that have programs out there. Federal Highway Administration. You might not think of that right off the bat, but for roads that are in and around federal lands, and that includes our reclamation projects, they will provide funds to maintain those roads. So something for you all to consider. Bureau of Land Management, they have their wildland fire management program. We coordinate closely with them, especially since many of their land that they're trying to protect from fires are upstream from our reservoirs. And so what can we do to better manage the fires that happen there, or rehabilitate the ecosystems that are there after a fire has come through? Next up is Bureau of Indian Affairs. They have a program for safety deficiencies at dams in Indian country. Then USDA, through a couple of their sub-agencies, NRCS, they have a watershed program. And then the Forest Service has clean water programs, as well as wildfire reduction and forest protection programs. Again, all of that ties to us because they're frequently upstream of our projects. And then the Army Corps of Engineers has various programs as well. Last thing I want to really hit on with you is help us help you, okay? Our jobs, sorry, I keep hitting the microphone here. Our jobs in the Upper Colorado region where Dagmar and I work is to get as much of those pieces of the pie as possible for our region. Many of these programs that I've shared with you, they're competitive programs. So when you're submitting a project for Santa Fe or Pojoaque or, pick your region, you're competing against projects that are being proposed from California, from Oregon, from Washington, from Nevada, from Missouri, from all over the country. So you really need to help us do a couple things. We can help you understand these projects. We can help you understand what these programs are and how your project might fit into it. But my first skin in the game bullet there, which is the second to the last bullet, is you have to be the ones who decide what is that project and how does it fit into these programs that we have, that we can share with you, that we can educate you about. You have to be the one who ultimately decides. Since it is a competitive process for ethics and competition reasons, I can only help you so far with deciding what is the project or what is the program that fits my project best. And you have to write and submit those applications for it. You have to come up with the proposal. We can't help you with that. I wish we could. There's so many times where I'm listening to something, I'm thinking, oh, if I was writing this proposal, I would do X, Y, and Z. But I can only go so far with that without violating ethics. My next skin in the game item is that many of these programs, not all of them, but many of them do require a cost share. So be thinking about ways that you can fund your portion of the project that you would like to have us help you fund. We heard yesterday, I believe it was Lacey, who talked about some of the state programs that are out there. Those certainly could be used as cost share funds. Or if you're an irrigation district and you've got ratepayers who are willing to foot some of that bill, look at that. Help come up with those ways that you can meet those cost share requirements. The more that you can show that you can cost share a fair amount of your project's costs, the more competitive it is in that process. So with that, I'll transition to my last slide here, and it's really just a little infographic to show you. A lot of our projects are funded through these two items, BIL and IRA, but they're executed through the WaterSmart program that the Dagmar administers. It's kind of an established set of programs and processes that are out there that was very easy to kind of plug and play many of our funding things into the programs that are administered there. And so this map shows where a lot of these projects are, where a lot of this WaterSmart funding is going to. And so I'll turn the time over to Dagmar and let her talk about the rest of that.
Thanks, Mike, and it's really great to be with you all in person today. Apologies I had to attend remotely yesterday because of some other work travel I have. But it's great to be here in person, to see you all, to see the students that are with us. In all the work that I do, the thing that brings me the most hope is working with students because they are the ones who are going to carry this ball forward. And so thank you so much for being here. So in my introduction, Sam was talking about how I now work for the Upper Colorado Basin Region of Reclamation with Mike. For crazy federal reasons, state of New Mexico and the Rio Grande Basin, Pecos, our other system components here are part of the Upper Colorado Basin region, and that's really why I'll say I suggested having the focus of the conference at this time be about the relationships between the Colorado River and the river systems and water systems that we normally talk about at these conferences. It's a really important component that is often in the background. And it is certainly an instigator of a lot of the funding that went into the bipartisan infrastructure law and IRA, as Mike was talking about. So we got all this money, and we needed some programs to put it into, and we put it into programs that I now manage for the Upper Colorado Basin region in this new position. And oh, by the way, I still live in Albuquerque. This is still my hometown, but I'm working at this larger scale and trying to implement these programs. And what I'd like to talk about is a little bit about how we use them and how they've evolved in order to incorporate all of this funding. The funding, Congress says specifically what they want this money to go to, and then we try to fit it into our existing programs. So as Mike talked about, the funding is going to internal and external programs, so reclamations projects, things we still manage, as well as external programs. And the external ones primarily are available to you through our WaterSmart program. WaterSmart program has been around since the passage of the Secure Water Act, in 2009. And I think you're all probably at least somewhat familiar with it. It relies on collaboration with reclamation. We really are water management partners with you and with all of the other 17 Western states. And that's a real opportunity for all of us to take advantage of federal funding, federal expertise, to really work together as partners through all levels of government. So overall, the WaterSmart grant programs that have a goal of increasing water supply reliability and developing conservation programs. And increasingly now, and I'm going to be talking about how the program's evolving, both with this new funding and with new priorities, it also includes funding for watershed health and other environmental improvements. So this is the more sort of traditional pre-BIL IRA funding diagram of the WaterSmart program. I think a lot of these are familiar to you. The Basin Study Program, there's been a lot of activity in the New Mexico community in this highly collaborative program. There was discussion yesterday by the Santa Fe team of the outcomes of the Santa Fe Basin Study. I had the privilege of working closely with Hannah Risley White, now the ISC director on the Pecos Basin Study, and there's been a lot of interesting work developing out of that, and now we're working on a large basin study for the Rio Grande component in New Mexico upstream of Elephant Butte. There's been a lot of activity in a lot of these other programs in New Mexico as well. I'll be talking a little bit down the road about the Cooperative Watershed Management Program, which has really been an opportunity for a lot of non-traditional entities to get involved in reclamations programs, to get in because there isn't cost share for that program. So the bipartisan infrastructure law, as Mike was talking about, brought a whole lot of new funding in and told us to apply it into different things. So this diagram is a bit of a crosswalk between our WaterSmart programs and where we're told to spend the money, as Mike laid out so clearly. So we've tried to plug these things in ways that we can use them. And I think the main thing that you can see here is there's a lot of money, and it's being distributed through programs that you can apply for. It's a lot more than we've had over the past decade. So this represents a real opportunity to upgrade our systems, to get funding to develop watershed community programs, to create resilience to changing climate, and really to work together to tackle these problems. Couple of slides out of order. So I hear people talk about that the water, we got a WaterSmart grant for that, and Mike and I were having a conversation this morning. It's hard for us actually to to know what you're talking about, because there's so many programs under our Water Smart umbrella, and we recognize how confusing that can be, and we're doing our best actually now to try to consolidate programs to the degree that the funding sources we get from Congress allow us to. But I want to highlight that there is some structure here. And what we're trying to do is build a foundation for the kind of work that we've been talking about at this conference that we need to do to build this resilience to our changing hydroclimate conditions. So we have programs that help you with planning for the ways that you're going to do that. We have programs for you to develop science and tools. And yesterday, Stacy was talking about the Water Data Act implementation, and that, it seems like every year that program gets funding through our science and tools programs to help implement that water data on the, within our systems, so that we can all be working from a common platform, understanding the same kind of information about our water systems and the ways that they're changing. And then finally, the largest sources of money go to construction on the ground projects, but those are implemented with the basis of the planning and science and tools that we can develop ahead of them. So there's kind of a pathway that you can get onto to try to take advantage of these programs. So these are grant programs. That's been highlighted here, and because of that, you need to interact with Reclamation's grant management systems. We'll talk a bit more about that. That can be complicated. Mike mentioned that this morning. And we recognize that complexity, and we provide as much assistance as we can to help you to apply for and execute these grants as much as we can do within the ethics programs. Each grant is assigned a grants officer technical representative from our Albuquerque area office generally. And they are able to, once you have this funding, work with you in partnership to help you to execute this to the benefit of whatever it is that you applied to do. Because they're grant programs, their primary mission, this is sort of the definition of grants in federal systems, is that they primarily benefit the recipient rather than directly benefit the federal government. But of course, collectively, as all of these projects are done, they benefit all of us. Usually, because we're looking for this kind of collaboration and we want local entities to have skin in the game, most of these have a 50% non-federal cost share requirement, although those cost share requirements are decreasing for the environmentally based programs to try to allow for local watershed groups and those that aren't sort of have the traditional level of funding of, say, transferred works from reclamation, irrigation districts, municipalities. It allows others in the game, including non-governmental organizations. And the list of applicants, because of that, commensurate with that, is growing. And I would say the advocacy of folks in the Albuquerque area office, the local community here, has really worked to expand that community, especially to non-governmental organizations and to development of some programs that don't require that level of sort of financial resource. But it is done through a competitive process, and we recognize that can be a challenge, and we're trying to work through that. So I believe that because of all of the great information given this morning, we're running a little short on time. True, Sam? So I'm going to talk kind of briefly about some of these programs. Really what I'm trying to do is highlight how these programs have been changing. The slides will be available on the WRRI website, so you can look at more of this information and follow the links there. So when people talk about Water Smart grants, they're generally talking about these water and energy efficiency grants. These are fairly high dollar values for on-the-ground work. And as I showed you with that umbrella, there's a whole lot of other things that are actually grants under the Water Smart program, but this confusing lingo is what we're generally talking about. And those are for traditional reclamation partners generally, but as you see here in the, this is the evaluation criteria for our application review committees when somebody sets in a proposal, there's only 4% dedicated here for a nexus to reclamation projects. And these water smart programs really do represent an expansion of who our partners are outside of our traditional little, narrow projects along the major waterways in the western United States, really to the whole western United States, and now to Hawaii, Alaska, and our territories, Guam, Northern Marianas Islands, Puerto Rico. So what we're doing is opening up these opportunities to get funding for things that develop improvements in water management efficiency, that use and develop renewable energy associated with our programs, to give all of those entities opportunities to apply for this funding and apply it outside of our traditional jurisdiction. If you don't have the kind of cost share money for one of those large water smart grants, there's also a small scale efficiency project, like Mike was talking about with the storage project. So where I'd like to just put a little bit of emphasis within these programs, and I'm not giving slides on all of them, but I would like to emphasize now the environmentally based ones. They have lower cost share. This program here, Cooperative Watershed Management Program, has no cost share for at least the first phase of work, and the second one's going away. So it's really for the whole program. But the New Mexicans have taken tremendous advantage of this program. There's maybe some of you have heard of the bug study up on the Rio Chama. That's one that's been lots in upland forest resilience building, planning for forest treatment and funding. Then the Isleta Reach Stewardship Alliance and Save Our Bosque Task Force have been very active in the Middle Rio Grande. So there's a lot going on in this program, and there will continue to be. And I think that this program has and its success has paved the way for some of the new environmental programs that are funded under the funding that Mike was talking about. So one is the environmental water resource projects, only a 25% cost share requirement, and the idea is to fund improvements in our environmental conditions as our climate warms, and also really in response to the impacts of the water infrastructure that reclamation has put into place. I'm going to just go quickly here and say that's one of a pair of two. The other, Aquatic Ecosystem Restoration Program, focuses more on some work that we've been collaborating with entities like the state of New Mexico and others here extensively for a long time, focused more on the impacts of our water resource projects on the ecosystems that are associated with them. So things like endangered species compliance, building fish passage, those sorts of things. So we expect that there's a lot going on here. Shout out to Grace Haggerty and others who are doing a lot of work in this area, and hopefully this is a funding opportunity. Then I'd just like to highlight one more of the planning project designs that first highlights some new planning design funding that we have for sort of large infrastructure projects, primarily new, but you could apply it for sort of rehabilitation as well, these project design grants. And what we've done in an effort to try to simplify this huge, all of those bubbles under that umbrella, is to try to consolidate some of our application processes. So we put the water strategy grants, those were the old water marketing grants, as well as our drought contingency planning. I know MRGCD did a great drought contingency plan a few years ago under that program. These are all under one call for proposals called Planning and Project Design. The next round of applications for that one is due March 4th, 2024, so you have a little time to get your proposals together. So one thing I think we all know is that it takes besides difficulty with applying for funding under Reclamation's Water Smart programs, we have challenges in the length of time that it takes us to get you your money. And I just want to highlight, number one, that there is a lot going on behind the scenes in order to comply with all of our ethics rules and our management processes to review, approve, get management approval of, and funding out to you in these programs. It can take 12 to 14 months, and that's a long time. We recognize that. We have a lot of active work going up to our Washington office level to try to shorten that time period for you. One thing that I'd like to highlight that takes time on our end and on your end is that because any of the projects that you do, especially on the ground, will have a federal nexus, you will be required to do environmental compliance activities on that. That means National Environmental Policy Act, Endangered Species Act, Clean Water Act. We talked a little yesterday. Hopefully, Clean Water Act really in our community. But that is one of the things that takes some real time in implementing these. But necessary component, and just wanted to highlight that we're working hard on trying to decrease those timelines to get this money out to your planning, science and technology, and on the ground projects as soon as we can. So these fonts look a little funny, but I'm not sure what happened there. They didn't on my screen, but just a couple of slides here with links that you'll be able to find on the website for information about our programs overall, how they're evolving, how you can get funding through these programs, and also to some degree how you can get help figuring out where you want to, what programs are appropriate for you to apply for, what the criteria are for those. There's a data visualization site that can really help you see what's been done in the past and sort of get the wheels turning on what's possible for your project. So homing in here on the WaterSmart program website, you can find a lot of information, including the data visualization tool and dashboards showing the timelines for funding on a lot of these opportunities. You can find it on your phone right now if you shine at that funny little square on the bottom there. But what I want to highlight when you get to that site, there's the QR again if you hadn't gotten to it yet, is on the front page, there's a schedule of all of the funding opportunities right there that I've circled in blue. And I'd say keep track of that because we update it regularly to identify changes in the funding opportunity announcements. And that is your key to our keeping track of our ever-evolving suite of programs and funding opportunities. And there are several of them open right now. And that highlights that those are listed in a trifold, a little summary pass out thing on our funding opportunities, both Bill, IRA, and WaterSmart that Mike created and that has been made available to you on the program website. And it'll tell you what's open right now, as well as that program schedule I just pointed out. So. With that, if we have a minute, maybe Mike and I can take some questions. Grace? Grace, did you have a question? Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay.
This is called a microphone. Doesn't work, though. Does it work? Okay. I do have a question. I'm glad you put up that slide on the environmental compliance because that's always usually like it's not fun to do proposals, but you put those in and wait, and then you get the project, and you have to deal with environmental compliance, and sometimes that can take so long that you're rushing to get the projects done. So I'm curious, has Reclamation thought about a federal capacity building in that, because of the number and the amount of dollars you're dealing with here, and also maybe even working with the Corps and other EPA, Fish and Wildlife Service, to try and make it so it's slightly a one-stop shop, streamline as much as possible for these projects.
Yes. Certainly there's work in that direction. That's the reason that I highlighted that as a sort of particular stumbling block. First, we get a little hung up on even who's going to and how we're going to fund it, right? And whether it's going to be direct funding to you or whether you have to pay it as the applicant or the recipient. So we're working to streamline those processes. We're also working on the changing our suite of categorical exclusions, so things that can be done without a lot of additional work, putting it into a category that already has that opportunity. But for our larger projects, there isn't really a way around getting involved in sort of more involved work under the National Environmental Policy Act, for example. So there are limits to the degree to which we can streamline it, but I appreciate your suggestion to work more closely with the other agencies, and I'm not sure the degree to that's going on, but I'll look into that one. Thanks.
Oh, I have the microphone now. Thank you for that great information. And I would say to answer part of Grace's question, I am in a process right now where we're cooperating with BIA and Bureau of Reclamation on one of the drought resiliency grants for NEPA compliance, and they are able to share CADXs among different federal agencies now, so that's helpful.
Especially within Interior, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I did want to ask if there's any other mechanisms maybe coming down the pike or already in place to support sort of long-term educational efforts to support the development of professionals that are going to carry on this work for the long term. And I'm thinking the federal agencies in this basin in particular, BOR, Army Corps, Fish and Wildlife, they all have strong interests in having management tools and the capabilities locally to do the work. And yet they're struggling, as Mike Hammond said, to find those people. And we need a pipeline from the universities. And I think these federal agencies have a place to help develop that. I know DOE has in the past funded a lot of graduate student work. And anyway, I just want to throw that out.
I appreciate that. We've had specifically training mostly for younger students in the past, and had some solicitors' opinions that tell us that we can't do that. So, but certainly I am, passionate about the education side myself, as I've said, and I know many of you know that my long-term involvement with the University of New Mexico, because that is what sort of brings me hope about the future. But tell your congressman about that interest, because we have some restrictions on our ability to do that. We have some opportunities through our Water Conservation Field Services program, but it's fairly limited, and I would love to see it expanded. So thanks for that point.
I'd throw in there, as I mentioned previously, some of these you are eligible to apply for if you are a university who is teamed up with a state or local agency. So I think there could be some potential there to bring in students working if a proposal like that were accepted.
Yes, absolutely. We do fund graduate students through a lot of these programs. So yes, it's a good point.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, we better get on with the rest of our program, but I will remind any attendees who have questions for Dagmar or Mike, feel free to reach out to them during the break, which we'll have coming up here probably a little after 11. We'll adjust some things on the program to give our next session enough time, but I just want to say thank you so much, Mike and Dagmar, for your presentation. Another round of applause. For our next session, we have something unique, and thanks to the wonders of modern technology and our wonderful AV crew in the back, we'll have our next session on wildfire and forest management practices brought to us virtually. So let's see if we can get our virtual moderator and panelists all lined up. It looks like they're all there. Can you all hear me? Okay, Emma. Well, what I'll just do is I'll introduce you, Emma, with your bio, and then I'll let you take the show from there. So Emma Metcalf has been a resource management coordinator with the Bureau of Reclamation's Albuquerque area office since 2018. She is the project coordinator for the Rio Grande Basin study and works extensively with partners and stakeholders at the nexus of upland forested watershed issues and downstream water delivery. Emma is a student in the Water Resources program at the University of New Mexico and lives in Albuquerque.
Thank you guys so much. My name is Emma Metcalf, and I tested positive for COVID on Tuesday, so I figured you all would appreciate me not being in person. And I know our panelists that we have here today are kind of from far and wide as well, so I think us joining virtually was really helpful. So thanks so much to the AV team and to the entire WRRI staff for accommodating us. So today we're here to talk about the San Juan Trauma Project through a slightly different lens, I think, than what you all have been hearing about for the last couple of days. You know, we know that the San Juan Trauma Project is a critical water source for central New Mexico. But I think what a lot of people maybe don't fully understand is that that project is entirely dependent on 3 very small headwater basins in southern Colorado that there are a lot of people working in and living in and thriving in, ranching, farming. But, you know, we as these downstream urban users maybe don't have as much awareness of that and the risks that are associated with having a high mountainous forested watershed. So I have some really great panelists here with us today, and I just wanted to take a moment to let them introduce themselves. And I think, guys, if you just want to give a brief hello and just kind of the real general scope of your organization, and then in a minute, we'll kind of dig more into what your organization does in the San Juan Trauma Project source headwaters. So first, I will introduce Caleb Stotts with the Chama Peak Land Alliance.
Hi, everybody. My name is Caleb Stotts. I'm the Executive Director of the Chama Peak Land Alliance. We're a nonprofit organization that was founded in 2010, and our mission is to practice and promote conservation in the Chama region in northern New Mexico and southern Colorado. And we were founded by landowners and managers and ranchers, and working on private lands is our primary focus.
Thank you, Caleb. And Matt?
Hello, everybody. I'm Matt Piccarello. I'm the Forest and Watershed Health Manager with the Nature Conservancy in New Mexico. So specifically here representing the Rio Grande Water Fund, which was created in 2014 to connect downstream water users with their headwaters, specifically pooling funding to get the work done in places like the San Juan Chama source watersheds. So that's I'll just leave it there. A lot more I can and will say likely, but happy to be here.
Thanks, Matt. And then Dana.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Dana Gwynn. I'm the Southwest Partnership Manager at the Forest Stewards Guild, which is a 501c3 nonprofit based in Santa Fe, New Mexico, that practices and promotes responsible forestry in order to support ecosystems and the folks that depend upon them. I'm joining you today because I'm also the lead coordinator and facilitator of the 232 Cohesive Strategy Partnership, 2 watersheds, 3 rivers, 2 states partnership. The 2 watersheds are the Rio Grande and the San Juan, the 3 rivers, the Rio Grande, the San Juan, and the Rio Chama. And then the 2 states are Colorado and New Mexico. So it's a group of partners that works across around 5 million acres to plan, implement, and monitor upland forestry treatments and watershed treatments in that area. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Dana, and I apologize for not putting the Guild's logo on here. I'll fix that for the conference proceedings. But so I think as everyone at this WRRI conference over the last 2 days have learned a lot about the San Juan Trauma Project, so we don't need to belabor this, but I think that the biggest point here is just emphasizing and underscoring the importance of the project, and again, just how kind of fragile and small the watersheds are that feed it. So we're saying, roughly maybe 50,000 acres contributing to, in some years, 75–80% of Albuquerque's drinking water. And like much of the West, as we know, there are risks of having forested watersheds, and those risks are being exacerbated with climate change. So as we know, wildfire is probably the primary threat to the San Juan Trauma Project. We've seen large landscape fires in the area, and we will continue to see them, and we expect to see one that will eventually burn through the San Juan Trauma Project's headwaters. With those wildfires come issues such as flooding and debris flows, that can really damage or inundate completely the infrastructure up there that feeds the San Juan Chama project. And then with that, there's, just some other kind of auxiliary threats that we are seeing, which is, tree mortality due to aridification, changing patterns in snow retention, and then of course the changing hydrodraft, which has kind of implications for all of these issues. So what I wanted to do next was kind of have our panelists talk through maybe some of those issues in a little more detail. And just from your perspective and your organization, what in your mind are kind of is that big threat? And if it's fire, maybe just give us a little context on that of, how and why and things we've seen like it in the area. So whoever wants to go first, Matt, you're first on my screen, so I hate to pick on you, but I think the Waterfront's perspective is really great here.
Sure. Yeah, I think where I'll start, everyone in this room knows the importance of the San Juan Chama project source watersheds, but a slide that I show with a map on it of the Forest Service's wildfire crisis strategy priority landscape. So this is a national prioritization of fire sheds all throughout the West. And I circle the San Juan Chama project source watersheds because it's not one of them. And so, the water fund is specifically tying our forest to water sources, whereas some other wildfire prevention risk reduction programs are maybe more tied to like homes and defensible space and that kind of infrastructure. And so, even though there's billions of dollars of infrastructure funding for work in the WRRI, the Wildland Urban Interface, and forest work, still there's this, I draw the circle around the San Juan Chama, and it's not a priority landscape for Forest Service funding. But that also kind of makes sense because the watersheds themselves are largely private lands. At least two of them are predominantly private lands, the Little Navajo and the Navajo. And so that's a very important fact when you think about what kind of funding can you spend on those pieces of ground. And so really just want to highlight that even though we all know how important they are, it's not necessarily, that doesn't guarantee success that all the right funding is going to hit the ground there. And so groups like the 232, CPLA, and the Rio Grande Water Fund, we're still focusing there. That's where we haven't taken our eye off of the importance of those watersheds. And then as far as threats, I mean, yeah, wildfires certainly. You mentioned climate change. I think climate change in terms of how that impacts these watersheds and forests in general. I mean, we've seen crazy fire behavior over the last several years. Fire regimes shifting a bit. A infrequent fire regime forest of 100 years ago might behave differently now if you had the same fire with today's climate and today's forests. And so the other last bit I'll say before I pass the mic here is it's important to consider these watersheds as infrastructure. And so we can certainly achieve ecological restoration. That's a goal of our work, but it's also important to remember that that's not the only goal, restoration. It's also, defensible space for watersheds. So not forgetting that this is where Albuquerque's water comes from, where a lot of Santa Fe's water comes from, the MRGCD. And so just it's a slight mental shift for me, and then I try to convey to folks is that restoration is great. We want that. We're going to do that. But also sometimes like a fuel break or something, that's not necessarily a restoration tool, but it's something that we do in those watersheds because ultimately we're trying to prevent catastrophic fire from impacting the diversions and the water source.
Thank you, Matt. Dana or Caleb, are there things you would like to add to that or emphasize?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit, Emma, to a point you just made earlier about it's a relatively small watershed system. I mean, if you go out there, it's big, but relatively it is fairly small. So it's about 115,000 acres. And when we're thinking about risks, when we're thinking about climate change and this sort of this era of mega fires, these fires that we're seeing these days, it's actually kind of the small areas. So for a little bit of context about what we've been seeing in other areas, there was a fire in 2020 near Rocky Mountain National Park called the East Troublesome Creek Fire. And that fire, it had one particular day, there was a 24-hour time period where it grew 140,000 acres. So it was burning at an average rate of like 6,000 acres per hour. And so you look at the size of this area, it's 115,000 acres. I mean, it really is feasible with our current conditions that this thing could all burn up in one day. And so that's just something that we're thinking about in the back of our minds as a possibility. When we're looking at sort of modern effects of severe wildfires, we think about like the Hermit's Peak, Calf Canyon fire a couple of years. Was that just last year? But we see all the damage to like the Guyana Canyon in the town of Las Vegas. What the sort of threats that they're facing from those debris flows, just really threatening their whole water infrastructure system. We look at the effects to the local acequia systems and the traditional water users there, and the effects of those communities that we're seeing. And we're looking at the cost. I don't know where it's at now, but I believe recovery has cost over $4 billion for that. And so it's frankly it's really difficult to address risks of that watersheds face, because they're big, they're mountainous, they're hard to access. There's only so many things that you can do, and then there's so many things that are out of control that they're pretty significant challenges.
Yeah, thank you, Caleb. I think that idea of magnitude, I mean, like you say, it's small, it's 115,000 acres, and I apologize for my mistake on that earlier, but that's also that's a lot of space as well, and a lot of trees and a lot of fuel. And so that magnitude, I think, is a really important point. Dana, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, Emma, I'll just add quickly that, since we're talking about threats, I think that considering the impacts of wildfire are a threat. I don't know if wildfire itself is. It is a natural part of these headwaters ecosystems. These are spruce fir and mixed conifer high altitude ecosystems. And so I think, to me, increasing the pace at which we figure out how to plan together and take action where it makes sense on this landscape, and where we have opportunities to be working across public and private boundaries. Matt Piccarello brought that up, that about half of these watersheds are privately owned, and the other half are U.S. Forest Service jurisdiction for the most part. And of that other portion, actually an extremely large part of it is the South San Juan Wilderness. And so thinking about where, based on other management opportunities, we can really work together to make a difference, especially in a cross-boundary situation, really matters. And that's what partners are trying to do in this area. I know you have other questions that are forthcoming around, well, what are we doing? But we talked, Matt and Caleb spoke a lot about the threats associated with the landscape and the dynamic itself. I also think that we are a threat to ourselves, the way that our bureaucracies and our systems work, and without the ability to think creatively and have institutional flexibility so that we can work effectively and efficiently in an area that's has outsized importance. 115,000 acres is about the size of the Santa Fe municipal watershed. And if we take that and think about the outsized impact downstream of this area to millions of water users in New Mexico, and to your all's ability to meet obligations to other states even farther downstream, this is a big deal, and we need to sometimes think about how we can get out of our own way and just move forward.
Well said, Dana. Thank you. I think, yeah, these issues are beyond, it's kind of this approach, I think, that we all have to take, and Caleb, you've emphasized this for me a lot in the last couple of weeks of, there's an economic lens here, there's an ecological lens, and there's a social lens of these different factors that make work in this area really challenging, but also really underscore the importance. So I think for just a second, and I apologize for not doing this off the bat, but just for a quick orientation. So these headwaters sit up in southern Colorado, just north of the town of Chama. So here's the state line. Let me get my pointer on. So the town of Chama's down here. There's a town of Promo about right here. And then there's 3 primary watersheds that feed the project. So this big one is the largest over on the right, and that is the Navajo River, and it feeds the Oso diversion. The second largest is the Rio Blanco, which feeds the Blanco diversion. And then the Little Oso is the smallest of the 3, and it feeds the Little Oso diversion. And so from these diversions, water is funneled into a series of tunnels totaling 26 miles in length that then delivers water downstream to Heron Reservoir. And I did just want to point out, where was it? That land ownership issue. I had another slide here that really kind of breaks down these different watersheds by that ownership. And so like Dana was just saying, there's a lot of wilderness, a lot of roadless, but then also, especially in that Navajo River, is private land. And so that cross-jurisdictional approach is absolutely key here. Okay, so I think we've done a good job of summarizing kind of the threats and risks and impacts. And so before I think we dig into your specific groups, I was just hoping that we could talk a little bit about the strategies that are employed in forest and watershed management to help mitigate these impacts. So things like, thinning, prescribed fire, mastication. So I'm not sure if one of you wants to take a stab and kind of, this is a water audience. And so maybe kind of a more forest lens of what we can do to help mitigate those impacts. Anyone feel like taking a stab?
Yeah,
Matt,
I can try it.
Great.
Caleb can fill in whatever I get wrong or miss. So, yeah, the primary goal or primary tool that we're using in these watersheds generally fuels reduction. And so I mentioned the difference between restoration and risk reduction, and depending on how close you are to homes or other infrastructure, the prescription might look somewhat different. But the other, I think a key goal, if you're doing restoration or maybe anything other than like just a fuel break where you're just cutting a band of trees out to act as a break if a fire were going through, is to enable the return of fire. So we are using masticators, so machines that have a big drum on it that just chew up the trees and leave large woody debris on the ground. But in general, forest treatments should have a fire component to them. Fire, as Dana said, is a natural part of these systems. And so it's really hard to separate that, to just say, well, we'll just do the thinning. You have to have a plan for the slash management after you've done the thinning. And so we're using a suite of tools. There's thinning using hand crews. I think there might be some mechanized thinning using large equipment, and some timber removal, but I think that's very minimal. I know a lot of firewood comes out of these watersheds as a way to use the material, and also just a need that the community has. Mentioned masticators. Yeah, I guess those are kind of the 3 fuels reduction techniques. And then all of these things require maintenance, whether it's prescribed fire or, if you thin a lot of these systems, you get gamble oak that'll come back. There's weeds that might come up because you've introduced, you've created some disturbance. There's equipment. It's impossible to not have those impacts. And so follow up with to remediate weeds and different things. So I'm dancing around the prescribed fire thing a bit. Collectively, we're working as a group to get fire back on the landscape in Archuleta County. There's some challenges associated with like local ordinances and different things that we're all working through. But regardless of how one feels about prescribed fire, I think just again, as Dana said, it's a natural part of the system, and it's really hard to separate that from any sort of forest treatments. So yeah, those are the primary things, just doing fuels reduction, and so that if a fire and when a fire does come, it won't be a huge 100,000 acre event. It might be something that's able to be suppressed given the sensitive nature of these watersheds.
Thank you, Matt. Caleb? Great. Dana, you go ahead. That was great.
Caleb, I'll let you add in a moment as well, but I think, and I want people to know that while I work for an organization based in Santa Fe, I actually live and work in Archuleta County, and so does Caleb. So these local actors, these folks that are managing these properties are people that we work with closely. And so, ultimately, Matt, you didn't dance around prescribed fire necessarily. I think it's important to measure, and I'm going to maybe even not dance around something even more unpopular, but I think managed wildfire is also something really important to think about in this landscape. Some folks have been up to this area. I drive by the diversions that bring the drinking water to your houses on a very regular basis. This is like an extremely remote area with a very small population and really rugged, high altitude terrain. So the logistics behind implementing prescribed fire in concert with those fuels reduction treatments that Matt is talking about is extremely logistically challenging. And it may actually be that creating decision space for ourselves and being prepared to receive a natural ignition on the landscape could help us manage most effectively. The reality is that even across 115,000 acres, if you were to treat 15 or 20% of it, the tool that is going to ultimately be the most cost effective and support the treatment of more acres with less resources is fire. And so getting comfortable with the fact that, or just recognizing discomfort with the fact that fire will be in this ecosystem and we have to prepare ahead of time for how to receive it appropriately and protect infrastructure and watershed values, I think is really kind of where it's at. Another thing I want to mention that is really interesting that's going on in this area is there's a lot of research happening around how best to manage forested ecosystems for snow accumulation, retention, and ablation, and how to slow down water in these upper areas and reaches. And a lot of the mechanical and fuels treatments that are happening are helping us learn about that and feed back into the action that we're taking on the landscape. So didn't want to steal your thunder, Caleb, but I just want to drive home really that managed wildfire and prescribed fire is kind of where we need to go in terms of the type of terrain this is, and that's going to be complex. There might be different authorities that we need to employ for cross-boundary fire management, but having those relationships in place ahead of time and knowing what we're going to do when that happens is really critical.
Thanks, Dana. And Caleb, is there anything you wanted to add quickly?
I really like being on panels with Matt and Dana because they cover a lot of those bases. I don't want to skip ahead to any other questions, but the best thing that I can add is give a little bit more of a summary of some of the actions that have been happening in the last few years in relation to treatments, happening on the ground. If that sounds good to you.
Yeah, and Caleb, I would just maybe ask that we let maybe Dana start with that through the lens of the 232. She does have to hop off at 11. So maybe Dana, if you want to take a minute and think about talk about, what are we doing and what is the 232 doing in the few minutes you have left with us?
Thanks, Emma, for being sensitive to my time. I've got until about 11:15. It's a moving target today. So Caleb, you should go ahead. Caleb's organization is doing all of this work Caleb's organization belongs to the 232. We're all working together closely, and the private lands work that Caleb is doing, supported by the Rio Grande Water Fund, is a huge part of how we're actually accomplishing work on the ground in this area. So he should go ahead and I'll follow up. Thank you.
Yeah, so our organization, since I can't remember, I'm not sure what the exact year we started this relationship with TNC, but I think it was maybe around 2014 or 2015. So for several years, CPLA has been working with TNC, the Rio Grande Water Fund, to implement treatments on private lands in this landscape. And so ultimately, a lot of the thank yous go out to funders of this project, which include Albuquerque Bernalillo County Water Utility Authority, Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District, City of Santa Fe. Actually, I think is just about ready to also start contributing. But the great thing about the Rio Grande Water Fund is that they have been working with downstream water users and other funding sources to bring in dollars to protect this really, important high value watershed area. And what that looks like from my lens is, we do a lot of the work with TNC contractually for that. And then we work with the landowners. We hire foresters, we hire the forest operators to implement the treatments. And so we do a lot of the mastication stuff, a little bit of timber harvest stuff, done some prescribed fire planning. And we have, I think there's been a little over $1 million invested in the last, 5, 6, 7 years. But it's pretty small compared to what I think needs to happen. And so over the last 10 years, I think between Rio Grande Water Fund and private landowner investments, there's been about maybe 1,500 acres treated. And that's in this landscape of 115,000 acres. So that's about, maybe 1% of the landscape treated in the last 10 years or so. TNC has done some really quick analysis. Because there's a lot of steep ground that it's hard to do much with. And then there's a lot of wilderness area where there's, frankly, no opportunities to get machines in there. But through a quick analysis that TNC has just done, there's at least 17,000 acres, of sort of restoration opportunities. And that's about 15% of the source area. So that kind of gives you a rough idea of sort of the scale that we're kind of hoping for, and what we've been doing so far to make it in.
Thank you, Caleb. That's great. I think, those metrics are really helpful for the context of, so, the downstream users can get an idea of what investment is really needed. So Dana or Matt, I'm happy to go with whichever one of you kind of thinks that will flow best from Caleb's remarks.
I'll be brief. I had the same numbers as written down that Caleb did about 17,000 acres. And so that's what we're thinking is treatable. So Caleb mentioned the slope and wilderness and things like that. That amounts to about $40 million estimated needed. So I did the math. It's like 3,300 an acre or something like that. So the cost of an acre depends on all sorts of things. It depends on the particular piece of ground. Is it very steep? Are you going to masticate? Are you going to use hand thinning? Are you including the follow-up treatments of prescribed fire or weed treatments? So it's difficult to say, here's the exact number that it costs to treat an acre. And that number also has grown over the last several years, like everything else. But just to give a rough sense of scale, Caleb mentioned the $1 million-ish in the last several years. And there's roughly $40 million in need. And then that's all a spatial exercise of, as I heard someone describe GIS, it's like, yeah, from outer space, we're looking at this and saying, here's where we need to treat. But then the next step in that phase is talking with the landowners. We say, well, here's how many acres we think are treatable, here's where they are. And then the landowner can say, well, yeah, but you can't access that because there's no road or whatever. And so, so the numbers, shift around. And so priority, it's a spatial exercise, but then it's also discussions with landowners to see what can we actually do. And then last thing I'll mention relative to how many acres to treat and where to treat them. We know we can't treat every single acre, right? We're not going to cut 116,000 acres of trees. 17,000, more reasonable, more feasible. TNC did some modeling the last year's when we wrapped it up that you can see the benefits of a treatment. So if you treat 10 acres of ground, the benefit of the wildfire risk reduction benefit extends beyond that 10 acres. And so that's a tool we have at our disposal to see, like, okay, where's the best, if we put this treatment here, whereas we call it the green shadow map, because the map shows the green benefits extending, how can we best place these treatments to get the most bang for our buck, knowing that we can't cut in every single acre. Even if it shows up as high priority, high risk, you may not be able to go there because of access issues or whatever. And so the more that we can spread that green shadow out with the smallest footprint is what we're going for. Yeah, thanks for, I'll pass to Dana.
Perfect. Thank you, Matt. Great. Well, yeah, Dana, do you want to kind of finish us out on landscape scale work that's happening in the region to address some of these concerns?
Sure, yeah, I can talk a little bit about the whole premise behind the 232 is going big. It's essentially a team of teams. So it's decentralized on purpose. It's a feature, not necessarily a flaw, but it can make it kind of messy to navigate. And essentially, we want to be thinking about on a localized scale, like in a place like the San Juan Chama Project source watersheds, how can we be working with local landowners and other land managers responsible for that area to plan and think about options for implementing different types of treatments to protect values that are at risk. And I know I'm speaking to a room of water managers and folks that work in water, but that was a lot of natural resource jargon that just came out of my mouth. And I think it's also really important to think about the people that are living in these areas and how their concerns and values are carried up and incorporated into landscape scale planning. And also how this area is connected to other places downstream very explicitly, which is very much what the Rio Grande Water Fund is about. So all of those things, we're talking a lot about watershed right now, but there are lots of opportunities to lean into planning that has multiple resource objectives. So in the 232 partnership landscape, we are very focused on watershed connectivity, but also on the movement of wildlife across these landscapes. And these forest health treatments can have really positive impacts for ungulates moving from southern Colorado into New Mexico. It also can help us strategically understand at a larger scale where wildfire transmission might happen from a high use recreation area up into a remote area that's hard to reach. And so even looking just on the edges of an area that's important like this, if you're more likely to have a wildfire start in one of those areas, really matters. And the only way you're going to find that out is by talking to the people that are managing that area locally. So the other thing I will say is that, Emma, you brought up at the beginning, or maybe it was Matt, there's these maybe conflicting is the wrong word. There's just a difference in opinion around where to put resources, when, and why. And the National Wildfire Crisis Strategy is one national strategy that's at play. But I will say that the states of both Colorado and New Mexico have new forest action plans as of 2020. Both of them name this area as a critically important priority. Nationally, there's a program called the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program that Congress funds and is part of the Farm Bill. So if you are looking for something important to lean on legislators about. I might recommend that you encourage them to keep the CFLRP programming in the Farm Bill next year and to lean on them to fully fund it. The CFLRP actually is part of this landscape, and there are approximately $3 million of U.S. Forest Service, USDA money coming into this landscape for application across 4 different national forests, one of which is the San Juan, where this project is located. And that money is not meant to be a one and done. It's meant to be a magnet for other dollars. And so those monies that are coming from that program help us do this cross-boundary coordination to get partners together and also to implement projects on the ground. We're about 1.5 years into implementing CFLRP programming. That's one of the things that's actively happening in this landscape. The CFLR boundary itself is actually almost 4 million acres, but this San Juan Chama project area is part of that. And I can say that the land managers in this area, the private landowners, which Caleb can speak to a little more, as well as the U.S. Forest Service, are very much on board and understand that this is a priority for Southern Colorado and Northern New Mexico. And so while we're talking about some doom and gloom things, we have this awesome combination of partners that want to talk about it and that want to move projects forward in this area. And so I would encourage you to get involved and to be supportive of different programming and opportunities to work together so that we can increase our pace and be really clear about where we want to work to create the largest outsized impact.
Thank you, Dana. And yeah, just to really reemphasize that, all of this work is possible because of partners like the ones we are lucky enough to have here today on this panel. And I just really thank you all for your hard work. The organizers did send me a little DM that we should probably wrap up here. So just wanted to open it up for a question or two if there's any from on the Zoom or in the audience at the in-person conference. But again, thank you all so much, and thank you for the accommodation to have us all join virtually.
Okay. All right, hello everyone. My name is Max Henkels, and I work for the New Mexico Department of Ag and was on the conference planning committee. And I'm very pleased to introduce our next speaker. So this is Nat Chacarez. Nat is the general counsel to the state engineer. He has worked for the OSE-ISD since 2018. He received his bachelor's degree from Harvard University and his law degree from the University of New Mexico School of Law. After law school, he clerked for the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals and then became an honors attorney in the Environmental Enforcement section of the U.S. Department of Justice. He currently oversees all stream system adjudications, general litigation, and rulemaking for the Office of the State Engineer. So please help me welcome Nat to the stage.
Hello, and thank you, Max, and thank you all for having me speak today on this this important issue on the Colorado River. I'm not going to talk about the Colorado River despite the conference title, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to give the talk that I wish someone gave to me. I've been the general counsel for the state engineer for about 2 years, and when I came in, we were just launching into some intensive settlement negotiations, which ended up yielding they were successful. They yielded a settlement between New Mexico and Texas and Colorado. Unfortunately, the United States, the other party in the case, didn't end up signing on to the settlement. I'll get to that. But as the general counsel, I was expected to be able to weigh in and say something intelligent about anything on Texas v. New Mexico, and I could not. So I felt like a fraud. I did a lot of research. I talked to a lot of the folks who'd been living with these issues for the past several decades, and I think I got up to speed. So basically, this could be a condensed version of everything you wanted to know about Texas v. New Mexico, but we're afraid to ask. So just the geography, I'm sure many of you already understand it, but in southern New Mexico and West Texas, we have Elephant Butte Dam, which was built in 1906. I'll get to it. to serve farmers in the Mesilla Valley in New Mexico, and then also down into the El Paso area, the El Paso Valley, and to serve farmers on the Mexico side of the border in Ciudad Juarez. So this was the first large reclamation project that was ever built. At the time Elephant Butte was built, it was the largest dam in the world. It was completed in 1916. Work started in 1906, 1908 timeframe. And it was meant to serve farmers again in two different states. And so immediately there was going to be some questions. Well, how are farmers in each state going to be treated? And the basic principle was simple enough to state: each farmer should get the same amount of water effectively on their land. The initial issues related to Elephant Butte and the Rio Grande project, which is the reclamation project that is served by Elephant Butte, were whether there's going to be any water. There was a lot of development up in Colorado in the San Luis Valley that everybody was concerned about. People had concerns as well about development in the middle Rio Grande Valley. And so initially the states, the federal government prohibited any more entry onto federal lands to do any more irrigation in those areas, which was controversial but upheld. Then the state signed a temporary compact to try to maintain the status quo in terms of water supply, while a more permanent compact could be negotiated. There was a joint, as happens with almost every single interstate compact, there was a joint hydrologic investigation, which formed a shared technical basis on which the compact could be negotiated, and that resulted in a compact in 1938. The interesting thing about the compact, one of the interesting things, so that the whole point of interstate compacts is to equitably apportion water between states. And one of the things that this compact did not do was equitably apportion the water between the United States, at least not explicitly. It also did not speak to groundwater, because during that hydrologic investigation, groundwater was not a significant source of supply for the uses then in place in both New Mexico and Texas. And everybody understood, I think, that there was going to be development of groundwater resources, but nobody really wanted to go there with respect to groundwater on this compact. Well, why was there no apportionment of water in the Rio Grande Compact? And I wish I should have put up a map, but essentially the project was to be operated as a unified whole. There were canals, laterals, and drains crisscrossing the state lines all the way down the Mesilla Valley. And so when you're talking about delivery of water to Texas, at that point, the first order way of determining that would have been measuring at dozens of different delivery points in Texas, and then subtracting out all the dozens of delivery points where water from Texas would be returned back to farmers in New Mexico. It would have been a nightmare. Instead, the assumption was every farmer was going to get the same amount of water for their farms within Texas and New Mexico. And this was explained by the lead negotiator for Texas, a man named Frank Clayton, when one of his constituents rightfully asked, "Wait, you got this compact and it didn't even divide the water. What did you negotiate?" And he said it was essentially infeasible and it was unnecessary because we had a unified project that was managed. The project was contemplated to have about 155,000 acres. 57% of those acres were in New Mexico and 43% of those acres were in Texas. And so the assumption was going to be of the available supply, 57% on farm was going to be in New Mexico and 43% would be in Texas. What happened after the compact was signed? We had some great water years in the early 40s, but pretty shortly thereafter, New Mexico entered a very major drought, in Texas for that matter. And in the late 1940s and early to mid 1950s, we were not getting full supply for the project, not even close. And that's when groundwater development in these areas really took off. This was in the open, everybody understood it, everybody saw the need for it, and everybody supported it. The Bureau of Reclamation was out there telling farmers, drill your wells so it takes some burden off the project to deliver your surface supply. And many, many farmers in New Mexico and Texas and Mexico did so. Then the other major development that occurred was in 1978, there were irrigation districts set up in New Mexico and Texas. So both were served by the Rio Grande project, but because they're subdivisions of different sovereign states, there were two different districts. EBID is the Elephant Butte Irrigation District in New Mexico, and the El Paso County Water Improvement District Number 1, or EPQUID, is the district in Texas. In 1978, those districts repaid their repayment contracts with the Bureau of Reclamation. And the thought behind these reclamation projects would be that the beneficiaries would pay back the cost of construction of the works, and at that point, they would get title and they would be able to operate the works. It sounded pretty good on paper, but in practice, we had two different districts in two different states who were sort of tussling with each other over how to properly operate the project so they'd all get water. And not surprisingly, before I get to that slide, let me jump ahead. Not surprisingly, the districts were not able right away to agree perfectly on how to operate the project and deliver water. There had been differences in the hydrology since 1938. Everybody had wells now. The project had different levels of efficiency. There were improvements to certain parts of the project. And so there was a lot of controversy over how much water needed to be delivered to each part of the district. And I'm just going to go back now. So this was a curve that is in an effort to sort of resolve these kind of disputes. The Bureau of Reclamation put together this figure, and it was a regression curve based on when they were releasing water out of Caballo, which is the regulating reservoir for the project right below Elephant Butte Reservoir, how much water gets to the headings in Texas. And you'll see that a full supply, it's a little under 800,000 acre feet. That's on the x-axis. The y-axis, the water delivered to Texas is more than that. And that's because you are counting return flows. I'm sorry, that's not just Texas, that's Texas and New Mexico. The deliveries are greater than the initial supply because you have return flows coming back from farmers mostly in New Mexico and getting delivered. So this breaks out the allocations at full supply. If you have about 760,000 acre feet of release, Mexico gets 60,000 acre feet off the top. That's easy. But then roughly 57% of it goes to New Mexico farmers, just under 500,000 acre feet. And then El Paso would get about 376,000 acre feet. That's about 43% of the total. Everybody was getting, during this period that this regression was based on, a full supply that was in proportion to the amount of lands that were in the project. The time period for this regression was what came to be known as the D2 time period. So this regression curve became known as the D2 curve. I've never heard that there's some magic in that word, what D2 means, but that's just what the curve means. And the period of study for that regression curve was 1951 to 1978. So that really encompassed the period in which the intensive groundwater development went into place. And that groundwater development reduced the efficiency of the project. There was less water getting back into the drains for return flows, and there was less water in the stream bed. Some of it was recharging into the aquifer because there was going to be groundwater withdrawn from the aquifer. But during that period, notwithstanding that groundwater use in the 50s and thereafter, we were getting full deliveries to all the farms based on this allocation formula. In the 80s, again, there were disputes, there were fights, and they weren't easily resolved. In 1980, New Mexico did a declaration of state engineer jurisdiction over the lower Rio Grande Basin, which encompassed the relevant areas for the project. And that essentially stopped new groundwater development without offsets to surface water depletions within New Mexico. But there were people who'd already gotten permit or who'd already established claims. They didn't need to get permits before 1980, but they'd established claims before then and started developing water resources. So there were some that they hadn't completed by 1980. And so there was some increased level of groundwater development that increased the hits on the river from 1980 forward. But it was not it was sort of a second order amount of effects after that period. In the 90s, in the 2000s, there were still fights between the districts and the Bureau of Reclamation as to how the project should be operated. And finally, in the 2006 to 2008 time period, the districts and the Bureau of Reclamation reached an agreement as to how the project would be operated. Texas was complaining that New Mexico's additional groundwater uses, even since 1978, were preventing Texas from getting the water it was entitled to. New Mexico was disagreeing with that, but their farmers also were worried that Texas would come after them for their groundwater pumping. So they reached what was called the 2008 the operating agreement, and it set out a new procedure for allocation, and it modified the D2 curve that I stated, and they called it the D3 curve, again, very creative. And the D3 curve essentially was designed to calculate how much water Texas was shorted in a given year. If we had been in the D2 period and they had released a certain amount of water from Caballo, they should have gotten, based on the D2 curve, a certain amount of water. If the deliveries didn't get up to that line, the difference would essentially turn into an allocation transfer of water from EBID to EPQUID, from the New Mexico farmers to the Texas farmers. In essence, the New Mexico farmers were agreeing without compensation to, the New Mexico Irrigation District was agreeing without compensation to send to Texas all the water that Texas claimed it was due. And this was not popular with a number of the member farmers of EBID. What EBID thought they were getting out of the deal, and the operating agreement does, state it, is that New Mexico farmers, and this is just explaining, how the D2 to D3 curve was calculated. The operating agreement protected EBID farmers from further encroachments on their right to pump groundwater. So the idea being, if we're pumping a lot of groundwater, we can, and we're degrading the efficiency of the project, we can continue pumping that groundwater. We're just going to get less surface water, which unfortunately would then lead to New Mexico pumping even more groundwater. It can turn into a vicious cycle. And the other big thing I'll just mention briefly, this operating agreement allowed for carryover storage in Elephant Butte for both districts, which was a big deal for Texas. The state of New Mexico is not a party to negotiations over this operating agreement. And once we sort of dug into that, and some of the folks who were integral to that are presenters at this conference, so Rolf Schmidt-Peterson will correct me where I mess up on this stuff. When we dug into how the accounting could operate and how we could get into this death spiral of increasing dependence on groundwater pumping and then getting even less surface supply and increasing dependence, and looking at how reclamation was currently accounting under the project, New Mexico had serious concerns with the operating agreement. For one thing, the way we were looking at how reclamation was accounting, even if we were in the D2 period, we wouldn't have met the D2 numbers that reclamation was claiming we should have met because of some changes to how reclamation had done the accounting in the project. So New Mexico looked at this as sort of a recipe for New Mexico to fail and objected to it. And there were some additional fights over the next several years. And finally, we get into court. New Mexico files suit over over some accounting problems that reclamation had and the operating agreement. And we essentially get a countersuit in the Supreme Court by Texas. And Texas said, okay, if you want to sue us over the operating agreement, we're going to go straight to the Supreme Court and sue you over all of your groundwater pumping. So the thing that EBID was trying to negotiate to protect for its farmers, the right to pump groundwater, now we weren't even getting that. Texas was challenging the right of New Mexico to pump groundwater. And Texas's litigation position was that any groundwater development after the signing of the compact, which was in 1938, which would have an effect on deliveries, was a violation of the compact and an interception of water that should have gone to Texas. Keep in mind, this is never how the project was operated. It's not how the early signers of the project then went on to administer the project. Again, everybody was encouraging everybody to drill wells right after the project was put in place. But, there was nothing in writing saying we could do that. And, Texas had the text of the compact saying right there that they, New Mexico had to deliver this water into Elephant Butte, and then Texas claimed that was all project water that was protected and shouldn't be intercepted by any farmers or municipal users in New Mexico. Another big background factor here is a growth of cities from between 1938 and the present. Both El Paso and Las Cruces grew quite a bit. El Paso grew more than Las Cruces. But in both places, you had a different kind of water demand and really a dependence on groundwater that you didn't have in 1938. And so struggling with how to fit that into the confines of this compact was one of the other major factors in the dispute. So we litigated between 2013 and a year ago over what exactly the compact means. New Mexico's position was that the compact allowed a reasonable amount of groundwater development in both states so long as farmers throughout the project could get full delivery of water when the project had full supply. And based on Reclamation's regression work, we could do that as long as depletions were the same as they were during that D2 period, which was the period 1951 to 1978, which encompassed the lion's share of groundwater development in both New Mexico and Texas. Texas's position, again, was that no groundwater development after 1938 was allowed in New Mexico. They didn't think that extended to their own groundwater development. They could intercept their own water if they wanted to. That was not something that New Mexico could complain about. So in litigation in May 2021, a special master ruled on summary judgment motions. There were some very significant rulings here. One, Texas already also claimed that New Mexico had no compact level apportionment to water below Elephant Butte. The district had contracts with the Bureau of Reclamation to get delivery of water, but New Mexico as a sovereign was not entitled to that water. It would just be project members who could contract to receive that water if, that was what the contracts provided for. The Supreme Court's special master rejected the view that New Mexico had no compact apportionment. The special master ruled, well, obviously the states intended to divide the water based on the amount of acreage in the project, roughly 57% to 43%, and New Mexico's 57% was a compact level apportionment that New Mexico could receive. And that was important in the litigation because if it was true that the operating agreement and the operations of reclamation were sending more water to Texas than Texas was entitled to, that could be a compact violation that New Mexico could recover on. So that was the first ruling, and then Texas got something of a victory in front of the special master. The special master also said New Mexico also does have an affirmative duty not to interfere with project deliveries to Texas. At some point, groundwater pumping in New Mexico would be too great for Texas to be able to get its project apportionment. And the special master left open at summary judgment because there were disputed issues of fact as to whether the amount of water Texas was entitled to was the 1938 condition, which is what Texas was asking for, or the D2 conditions, which is what New Mexico's litigation position was, and which is what the project has, since 1978, been purported to operate to. And so after that, we held a trial on sort of background facts and history, which is largely what I've gone through with you. We were going to go to an expert phase of the trial in 2022 when we went into settlement talks with a new mediator, and we went into a really intensive effort. And pretty early in the negotiations, we hit on sort of the big picture important points for both Texas and New Mexico that we could agree to. We were hoping we could have the United States on board. They didn't, in the end, come on board. But what when it was clear the United States wouldn't be on board, the states decided we still wanted to go forward with the big picture settlement that we had signed on to. What is the agreement? The agreement, Texas wanted what they didn't have in the original compact, which is an explicit index delivery requirement at one point on the Texas state line. At this point, with all of the data about the project deliveries during the D2 period and afterwards, we could run a pretty good regression of, all right, if we have index deliveries at a gauge on the main stem of the Rio Grande at the state line, that will be, that will closely correlate with a full supply for Texas. And so we now had the data to come up with an accurate index delivery obligation for New Mexico. Even though the molecules of water are still running back and forth across the state lines through canals and drains, we knew what a full supply would correlate to at the state line. And so we agreed that we could do a state line index delivery. That was very important for Texas because now they know what they can enforce. They can get easy relief if we don't meet the index obligation. What did New Mexico want? We wanted the level of depletions, the level of so-called interference with project deliveries to be pegged not to the 1938 groundwater conditions, but to the D2 levels of depletions, that original reclamation regression that the project has been operated towards. So that's, Texas got the big thing of the index. New Mexico got the big thing of D2 levels of deliveries are what Texas is entitled to under the compact. I mentioned before that New Mexico had some real issues with how the accounting was being done by reclamation. Many of these accounting issues were down in Texas after New Mexico had no control over the water. There was, certain deliveries that reclamation's accounting showed people weren't getting full delivery when New Mexico said that's not true. You did get full delivery. You just changed how you were counting. And this state line delivery obligation really negates all of that accounting, because instead of counting how much Texas is getting at each heading to determine whether they're getting a full supply, it's just how much water is at that state line. And so a lot of the things that New Mexico had problems with in the accounting go away with this state line index. That's the big picture. That's it. It's a pretty simple deal. There's a lot of detail in the consent decree about how to calculate the index, and there's various adjustments for climate change and aridification. There's some adjustments for severe storm events. There's a lot of detail there, but the basic overall contours were Texas gets a delivery obligation, New Mexico gets D2 levels of depletions, and simplified accounting. Now, the United States, as I mentioned, did not sign on to this. And I'm not going to say what they wanted in the negotiations, because those were confidential negotiations. But right now, we are in the Supreme Court. We're asking the Supreme Court to accept this settlement. And the United States has filed exceptions to the settlement. They did those last month. And the states are going to jointly respond to those exceptions next month. The two districts, EBID and EPQUID, have joined reclamation in opposing the settlement. And I'm just going to go through at a high level what the objections that the United States have put forward are. And they simplified them pretty nicely, which is a smart thing to do in litigation. The three main arguments: the United States was allowed to intervene in the Supreme Court litigation. It said it had special sovereign reasons for needing to be in the litigation because it had duties to deliver water to Texas. It had duties to deliver water to Mexico. It should be a party. It should have a voice here. And this settlement would dispose of the case with the United States claims not being dealt with. And normally you don't just dismiss a party's claims over their objection just because other parties want the case to settle. The second point that the United States has is that there would be new obligations on the United States. They point out the accounting is going to have to be different, and they're the ones who do the accounting. And they're arguing that, there's a new gauge that we're going to have to maintain and check the data on. And then the last argument the United States makes is really the substance of what Texas put in their original complaint. The United States' last argument is there shouldn't be any more groundwater depletions in New Mexico beside the 1938 levels of depletions. Again, notwithstanding the fact that the Bureau of Reclamation itself encouraged the groundwater development that took us away from the 1938 levels of depletions. And the Elephant Butte Irrigation District has the further problem. What the settlement does is it has some enforcement provisions. So if New Mexico fails to deliver for a certain period of time, we're obligated to take non-specific actions to remedy that. And then if those so it doesn't specify exactly how we get more water to the state line. If that fails after a certain number of years, there's going to be an allocation transfer from EBID to EPQUID in terms of reservoir storage in Elephant Butte. If that sounds familiar, it should, because that's what the districts agreed to in that operating agreement. But that, at this point, that only happens after other measures that the state of New Mexico has tried have been unsuccessful to get the water to Texas. And this time, EBID says, okay, it's all right if we agree to an allocation transfer, but at this point, you're imposing an allocation transfer on us, and we're not consenting to that. That's not okay in this consent decree. So those are the main objections to the consent decree that the Supreme Court is going to have to grapple with. And I'm just, the slide deck, which I think you'll have in your materials, I go into a little bit more detail here. The so the first one was pretty straightforward, disposing of U.S. claims without their consent. I'll just put that up there. What the states argue is that Texas's claims are essentially derivative of, United States claims are essentially derivative of Texas's claims. The United States is worried that they're not going to be able to deliver the water to project beneficiaries in Texas. That's really Texas's problem, and Texas is confident that with this consent decree, they have the mechanisms in place to be able to get all of the water that their state is entitled to. Texas does not agree that the United States can hold up a settlement that Texas thinks is good for Texas farmers because the United States thinks it's not good enough for Texas farmers. So I think that also is a pretty good, simple message. We don't know where the Supreme Court's going to go with that. The second point, these new obligations on the United States. Normally, when you settle a case, you can't just say, oh, okay, and somebody else is going to pay the damages, and they're not here to say no. You can't impose real substantive obligations on a non-settling party. And that's really what the United States is claiming is happening here. The states say that this is really a chimera. The United States is already doing project accounting. They all the time across the West maintain compact gauges to ensure that the compact can be administered properly. This is just changing what sorts of spreadsheets and what sorts of formulas the United States has to use to do the accounting. But they're already doing the accounting. It's not a new obligation. Again, we'll see where the Supreme Court comes down on that objection. The last objection, that the consent decree is contrary to the compact, I've already sort of signaled what the state's position is on that. The United States' role should be to allocate and deliver water, not to say, oh, substantively, we didn't sign the compact, but we think that Texas should get this amount of water. That's our read of the compact. Again, Texas gets to decide how much water it thinks it's entitled to under the compact, in the state's view. The 1938 condition that Texas put in their complaint is a litigation position, and that the United States piggybacked onto when they intervened, that was a litigation position. Texas can bargain that away if they think it's a good deal. And they did here. They bargained away the 1938 condition because now instead they have a easily measurable and quantifiable and enforceable state line delivery obligation. And by the way, all they bargained away too was the D2 condition, which is what Reclamation has always tried to administer the project to anyway. So if administering the project to D2 is a violation of the compact, Reclamation has been abetting a violation of the compact since 1951. So again, those are the state's position. As to EBID's concern that the state is now sending their water to Texas, and their water alone to Texas to satisfy the compact, the states, there's some Supreme Court precedent. It's a case actually it was a New Mexico versus Colorado dispute called Hinderleiter versus La Plata Irrigation District. I'm forgetting the exact title, but it was one of the first foundational interstate compact cases. And there, a farmer in Colorado who was senior and in priority was shut off in order to send water to New Mexico. And that farmer sued and said, the governor of Colorado and the state of Colorado had no right to enter into a compact that would deprive me of my senior water right for the benefit of New Mexico. And the Supreme Court rejected that claim. It said, no, the state of Colorado, as the sovereign, can figure out how to deal with a neighboring state in an equitable apportionment of water. And if, the state of Colorado doesn't have all the water to satisfy all the valid legal claims under Colorado law, that's tough. Colorado farmers are not going to be able to use water that's not Colorado water. So New Mexico and Texas's position is we can, as the sovereigns, have the right to cut off, to curtail rights in New Mexico when necessary to get the water to Texas. Now, EBID's response to that, and it's a good response, is, yeah, but we're senior to almost everybody else in the Lower Rio Grande. How come it's our water that has to go to Texas? To which our response is, you're right, but that's a matter of New Mexico law that you're senior to other users in New Mexico. And we will administer water in New Mexico so that seniors are not unduly harmed. But that's not something that should be in a Supreme Court decree that Texas can enforce. That's a matter between users and the state of New Mexico. And again, that's an open question. We'll see where the Supreme Court goes with that. Sorry, I'm not good at keeping my slides on track with where I am. That's really the crux of the case. I hope I simplified it enough to where if somebody asks you a question, you feel like, you're not as dumb as I felt when 2 years ago I was asked, hey, is this index obligation? You have any concerns with that? I don't know, So I'm happy to take questions. I know, we have other things that you have on the agenda, but that's the 30-minute version of Texas v. New Mexico.
All right, we have some time for some quick questions. Does anyone have a question for Nat?
I think they're bringing a microphone so others can hear you. Yes. Oh, well, no.
Oh, this your talk it brings back. I'm here because of what happened in 1980, and before this interregnum, when we were not a declared basin, there was no entity who could study groundwater in the area south of Caballo Dam, or Elephant Butte for that matter. And in the Water Resources Research Act of 1963, Clinton Anderson and the San Juan Chama project got started. All that, one of the first tasks of the Water Institute, as probably one of the few living charter members of the Institute, we were tasked to do a groundwater study. Because Steve Reynolds came down and he said, why are you doing that study? This is compact water. And he instructed us, compact water is sure as hell not ice. But then they brought in the USGS, came to our aid. Clyde Wilson did a monumental study that was completed in 1981. Sadly, 1 month after the state was declared basin, Clyde went out hunting and came back. His body was carried out by his son out of the Gila. And so we lost one of the greatest minds, all the 10 years of his research, and they put together his work posthumously. And a lot of people don't realize it. Those are just, and I had come out of federal, I was working for a state, just started a state with the State Bureau of Geology, Bureau of Mines back then. And the USGS district chief asked me and a small group of tech people to go down to Las Cruces and start working with the USGS files and recover what we could. But that's the only reason. And so you poor guys have been stuck with me for the last 30 years just because of all this crap you talked about. Thank you. It was awesome.
Well, thank you. I just, yeah, there's been a real evolution about what is this water? Is this compact water? Is this something else? And without the scientific understanding that everybody has been putting into this, settling these disputes would not have been possible. I say that very confidently. So thank you. Yeah.
I know there's someone else with a question, but I'm just going to have to say I don't want to take any more of Max Henkel's time. So if you'd like, I would say please find Nat after the program concludes. So yeah, with that, I'll have, thank you so much, Nat. Another round of applause.
Yeah. And I'll hang around if folks want to have any more questions.
Okay, thank you so much. To introduce our final panel of the day, I'd like to welcome to the stage Austin Hansen of Interra.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, final panel will be a farmer panel on water and agriculture policy. Panel members include Troy Richardson, Four Daughters Land and Cattle Company out of Valencia County, Mark Garcia out of Valencia County, Axton Franzoy out of Doñana County, and the moderator is going to be Max Hankels, who works as a program manager for the New Mexico Department of Agriculture. Max covers a wide range of natural resource policy topics for NMDA, including federal land management, endangered species, noxious weeds, soil health, climate change, and water resources. In the water realm, Milk served as a proxy representative for the Secretary of Agriculture on the 2022 New Mexico Water Policy and Infrastructure Task Force.
All right. Hello, everyone. So thank you for the introduction. My name is Max Hankels. I work for the New Mexico Department of Ag. And so I don't want to take up too much time with a spiel about the panel, but basically we're going to kind of cover, a lot of the conference has been a lot of high-level policy, looking basin-wide, looking at compacts, that sort of thing. And I think it's important to also bring it down to the farm scale and to kind of the people on the ground using the water and learn a little about their decision making and kind of, bring it back home for that. So on this panel, I'm going to let each of our three farmers introduce themselves. We have two from the Middle Rio Grande and one from the Lower Rio Grande. And we're going to basically break it up kind of in three general sections. The first part's going to be on kind of the impact of water resources on their seasonal decision making. The second part will be kind of looking at water sources more in the long-term planning, changes that have been made through the recent, multi-decade drought. And then we'll finish up just with some ideas for policy, research, and maybe get into some regional water planning. So just to start off, I'll let each of the panelists introduce themselves and maybe just give a quick description of your operation, what you're growing, and the history of your farm. So.
Yes, I'll start. My name is Troy Richardson. I'm here. I'm with Four Daughters Land and Cattle Company. We farm a little over 1,000 acres in the valley here. We've got 400 acres of pecans and then several hundred acres of alfalfa and other forage crops, wheat, oats, corn, whatever. I've been a well driller for most of my career. I've got a drilling company in Las Cruces right now, so we do quite a bit of irrigation work in that lower Rio Grande Valley, so I'm fairly familiar with the lower Rio Grande also.
Hello, everyone. Is this working? Sorry.
Closer.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. I'm Axton Franzoy. I farm 3,400 acres in the lower Rio Grande Valley. I'm a row crop farmer as far as vegetables, and I also own some pecan acreage as well. So I'm a fifth generation farmer, so we've been there for quite a while.
Good morning. My name is Mark Garcia. I think we all have something in common. We both don't know what's going to come out of my mouth today. So I'm a retired AP Calculus teacher from Belen High School. I taught school. I was born and raised on the farm I have. We farm just under 400 acres. It's alfalfa, grass, oats. We do a lot of service for people, custom cutting and baling and hauling and things of that nature. Yeah, let's see what comes out of this mouth today.
Cool. All right, so we're going to be talking kind of about, starting with just a little bit about the seasonal decision making, both how water resources impact that, as well as, these are all water managers, researchers. They don't know the other business side, other aspects you're looking at too. So I guess just kind of first question, what would be the main business factors you consider when planning your field season, and where does water resources fit in that?
So, if all of you haven't been driving around, but you've seen over the past years, if you drive through farms and take a look, you see a lot more alfalfa back in the day, and in my opinion, you see a lot more cotton in the lower Rio Grande Valley. So farmers, it's not just market driven. We do have conscientious approaches to what is best to conserve our water and what's better for our rotation. For example, when I was a kid, we used to farm a lot more alfalfa, and as of now, we're back into cotton farming. A big majority of our farming cotton right now to conserve water. Our organization as well has entered into the land fallowing program. We applied for it, so we're going to actually around 500 acres enter the program to fallow some land for 2 years in order to conserve water, give it to another entity that needs it. And then we're looking forward to that program and how it's in its early steps is going to help us conserve water in the lower Rio Grande Valley. You guys have anything?
Yeah, for me, it always comes down to water. It doesn't work. It works now, doesn't it? It always comes down to water. At the Valencia County, what's so scary to me is I see so many farmlands being developed at a high rate, and I get it. I was born and raised in that valley, and it's absolutely beautiful. But my question is, I always ask my students, if you want a better answer, ask a better question. My question is, what do we want? We're subdividing at a high rate. We've got wonderful birds that use us as a migrate zone. I always say that farmers are the best environmentalists. So what do we want it to look like? I know people's alfalfa, for whatever reason, has a bad rap of being a high use water crop. And I've seen property that has not been irrigated in years and that alfalfa comes back up just as beautiful as it was when it was planted 4 or 5 years later. So I want to make sure that alfalfa is not a bad rap. I'm using that right now. I was able to get lucky enough to get water in some of my property to plant alfalfa. And my business not only sustains us and the few employees that I have, but it also has an effect on other people that I grow grass for and alfalfa for, and they have small businesses, and small businesses are really the heart and soul of the United States. And when we start taking those small businesses and hampering them, it does something to the community. So we got to be really careful with that.
Another thing specifically on my farms in the lower Rio Grande Valley along the Rio Grande River is I'm noticing that as our allocations have been becoming less and less, the salinity in our groundwater as well as the salinity in our soil has greatly increased. That, as far as our farms, has made it difficult to grow our vegetables because the salinity levels are getting so high that we're seeing a substantial drop in yield. So for us, for example, we've been purchasing more farms outside of the lower Rio Grande area in Deming as well as in Lordsburg, and we're kind of moving more of our vegetable produce away from the lower Rio Grande Valley in order to rest the ground and come up with practices to deplete the salinity, and hopefully in my lifetime soon we have a lot more allocation and we can kind of get that ground back into a substantial circumstance to where we can grow our vegetables again.
One thing we need to understand is as farmers here, there's a lot of people in the public don't understand it for some reason, but without the water, we can't feed everybody. We are, even us, if we're growing alfalfa and forage crops, that's what's feeding your beef and your pigs and all your pork. All that comes. If we're short of water and we can't grow the hay or we can't grow the corn, whatever those feed crops are, that's going to increase prices in the grocery store of all the meats. Besides, these guys growing vegetables, this is all connected, and it all starts with water. One thing I want to say, talk about farmers in general, and Axton's guys down there are big about it. They're some of the biggest gamblers in the world. These guys are, all in on a single hand every year, onions, lettuce guys especially. I've watched them lose money for 20 years in a row and maybe make it back on the 20th year, and we don't need to be worrying about water. There's plenty of other things plenty of other risks, even if you do get it watered. We run out of water. That's at the very beginning. You gotta get the crop grown, just to even hope to make the market,
Another thing is when our allotments come in, some of the dates don't get set till later on in the season. And throughout my growing season, I have certain slots to plant my vegetables. And whenever I get that surface water that's a lot better water than the groundwater, that affects how my yields are going to come out. So it's difficult for a lot of these. We don't get enough planning in order when we get the water, and the duration that we have during these drought conditions, it's a very short time that we have that water. So we do our best to allocate that water and use it more so on some crops than others, whereas we're not just trying to use that water, throughout all our acreage. We're trying to use it in more concentrated areas. So we're very conscientious on where we use that groundwater and put it to its best use, just so you guys know.
Yeah, I'm curious along those lines. I had a couple follow-ups. Where do you get your information, when you're approaching the irrigation season? Is it from MRGCD or EBID, or is it from other sources in terms of what the water supply will be? And then also, what are those I think a really important thing that people miss is, what is the timeline you need to make these key decisions each year to decide what you're going to do? And I know that in the past few years, that's been difficult with the information coming a little late. So I'm just curious, what are your information sources, and when do you need to know to make the best decision for the year?
And then I can't speak for the Middle Rio Grande. I know the jurisdictions, operate a little differently, but for us, we're going to kind of stick to our planned farming, and we usually don't know exactly when we're going to get water, how much, till, my onions are already in the ground. I have onions in the ground right now. I just finished planting, and some of that surface water is very institutional on how my crop's going to finish. And do I know if I'm going to get that release date, May 15th, April 15th, or if it's going to be in June? Sometimes I don't get that water until that crop is done. And so in a way, I can't necessarily plan on when I'm going to get surface water, how much, till we look at the snowpack, runoff, other things. So we're kind of taking a big gamble and keeping it in the hands of the irrigation districts to be informative and help us out so we can make those quick decisions and use it to the best of our ability.
In the Middle Rio Grande, it is administered differently, of course. But the only information we get is from MRGCD, and if there's any, if they're not generally not. Maybe they don't have a whole lot of information early, and they don't want to promise anything that may not be able to be delivered. But in the last couple of years, and probably for 5 years to come, we don't have any storage anyways. We are short at the end of the season every year now, and it all depends on the snowpack. This year, there was quite a bit of water, and there's a lot of it that went down the river we weren't allowed to use it in the beginning. Actually, Mark and myself and several other local farmers, we kind of started a fight with the Conservancy to get them to deliver some water. I'm not sure how successful we've been, but in this season, it seemed like we made a little bit of progress. But the planning is, we're all just taking a gamble here. It's really hard to count on any of it.
I'm hoping everybody starts skiing by Thanksgiving. We start looking at, I'm looking at the news. I've got different apps. People think I'm on Facebook. I don't do Facebook. I have so many apps on my phone. I'm just looking and just praying and hoping that we get a good snowpack because we don't have, like Troy was saying, we don't have any kind of storage. And it's interesting. I was born and raised in this farm. I've bought other property because I don't want to see it subdivide. I'm currently in process going to buy some more. It's something you can't explain. I think we all been involved at some point or another with a farm, whether you grew up and you had an uncle had a farm, or somebody from your friends and you went out there and you had a hayride, whatever the case was, and you smelt that early morning dew that's coming down, and it's something that's in your blood, and you just feel it and you can't explain it, and it's kind of like, when you hang out with somebody, you don't remember what they tell you, what they taught you. You remember how they made you feel. It's something about my farm, the way that makes us feel, and it's something you just can't really explain. But the process of us looking for moisture is a lot of it's just hoping and praying. And I want to see everybody skiing on Thanksgiving because I know that snowpack is going to be our only savior right now because we don't have any kind of storage up north.
All right, so we're going to kind of move on to the kind of second theme. So talking about how water availability and especially the shortages in the last couple decades, what role has that played in your long-term planning for your operations? And maybe you could highlight also just some changes you've implemented or are thinking of implementing to deal with those issues.
So when I was young, before I got very serious into farming, when I was going to school, I still worked on the farm, but we had an overabundance of water. The reservoirs were full, we were getting full allotments, and a lot's changed since I've been professionally farming. We're in a severe drought, and one of my concerns is the way policy's being handled now, it's because we're in a very critical area, whereas during the late 80s and 90s and into the 2000s, there was an abundance of water. Nobody was really talking about its effects. So now we're kind of in one of the probably the most critical area that we've ever been in this drought. And what concerns me is and I think it will happen in our lifetime, we're going to have an overabundance of water again. And I don't want to lose sight of situations like we're in now. Whenever we have full allotments and an overabundance of water, we need to always be conscientious of how much water we have, and it's not going to last forever. We live in the desert Southwest. We're going to go through ups and downs. We have just in the 100 years been through, this is our third drought, I believe, and it's going to get better, but it's also going to come again. So for my kids and my grandkids, I want to be sure that we implement good policy and good efficiency so that when we come to this state again, we are efficient about it and everybody gets appropriately taken care of.
And long-term planning, we planted pecan trees 15 years ago or something, and that's long-term. To do that counting on surface water is foolish. The only way we know that we can keep those irrigated is the groundwater rights. That farm that we're farming in Belen, we bought water rights to be sure we had something to pump. Drilled a bunch of wells. And that's the only, pecan orchard, it doesn't even start being profitable till 15 years maybe? Mm-hmm. You've spent a lot of money on it for a long time before it even starts paying back. Talking about efficiency, we've worked on that quite a bit. We put in sprinkler systems in those orchards. Compared to flood, I can run sprinklers and probably use it's somewhere in the range of half the water, and grow the same crop or better. In the sandy soil, especially, I think the heavier soils in the valley are probably not quite as big a disparity. And these guys in the lower Rio Grande, a lot of the vegetable guys are running drip irrigation. I'll tell you, in Deming, if it weren't for drip irrigation, those guys couldn't grow a darn thing. Those farms all kind of ran out of water, what, 30 years ago, 40 years ago?
Still running.
But with the drip irrigation, that T-tape, they put a lot of stuff back into production that wasn't farmed for a long time. But there's a lot of technology like that we can use to get efficiency. And even on our trees, I've got a system, we're working on a system, actually, it's not quite put together, to be able to use surface water also in the sprinklers. So that when there is surface water, it's a whole lot cheaper to pump that than it is to pump groundwater from 100, 200 feet depths, you know?
Speaking of efficiency, I do a lot of custom laser leveling for other farmers because a lot of farmers don't have wells, and they've maybe had 30, 40, 50 acres, and they do rely on MRGCD for their water. But speaking of efficiency and being effective, if you look at the Rio Grande, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but in my mid-50s, I don't know what happened, but in my mid-50s, but went by quick, you see a lot of the river doesn't look like it was when I was a kid. You see a lot of species, you know, you got Chinese elms, you got salt cedar, you've got just different species going there. I don't even recognize it anymore. And we need to take care of our river. We need to be more effective and efficient with that river if we want to keep this farming community alive. Because it's not just about us. I mean, we keep talking about us, but you know, I've got my pheasants out there. I've got my raccoons. I've got different animals, elk roaming on my property, and so it's not just us there. We provide a space for habitat for other animals out there too.
And also with long-term planning, you know, the amount of acres that's farmed in the Lower Rio Grande Valley, it hasn't really been increasing, you know, and the consumption of agricultural water from some of the information that I looked at, my father's on various boards, you know, our consumption has stayed about the same since the 30s, 40s, 50s, 70s, you know, farming's not growing. And I think all of us can agree, and everybody knows that municipalities and other businesses are going to come up, but as far as there's only a certain amount of water in this state right now, and we're in a severe drought, so how we allocate and accommodate for the growing population and the growing businesses, we need to be smart about. We do like the idea of, you know, this rotational fallowing that's getting implemented in order to comply with saving water, but I don't feel that it's necessarily a long-term plan, whereas if everything keeps growing, there's only so much water out there, so we need to be continuing looking for long-term plans in order to, you know, change water, or, you know, we can't put more straws into the cup anymore. We need to kind of replace it, and I think if we're smart about that, we need to always take that into consideration, how that's going to be done and effective to the farmer and residents and the municipalities. We need to work together and have a long-term plan in order to make up for that.
Cool. So kind of moving on to maybe some ideas, you know, we have a lot of out here folks that work, researchers, folks working in the university, and also, you know, some agency and policymakers. We'll maybe just start with researchers and university, you know, students, professors, whoever. Do you have, just kind of curious, do you have any ideas for what type of research or maybe just information data to be collected would be useful to either your operation or just kind of agriculture in general in your region?
You know, when I was a kid, we were primarily flood irrigated, and we've moved to drip and sprinklers. You know, we do still have some flood irrigated ground in order to kind of help combatant salts. You know, we don't irrigate it throughout the season, but I think the data, I think it's kind of a gray area. Is drip really conserving water? Is it not? As far as us as farmers, I think we're all in agreement that drip irrigation and sprinkler irrigation on trees and row crops, in our opinion, feels like we conserve water, or at least we're significantly more efficient in it. As far as how many studies is really being done on that, you know, so it's on paper. I think we're always open to getting more people looking into that so that we actually have factual evidence on what we're doing, and is what we're doing the best way to be efficient with our water. That's one of my recommendations anyhow.
One thing I think is important to look at In this middle Rio Grande, especially when we're talking about fighting with, we've got a lawsuit with Texas and delivering compact water. If you look at the riparian zone through the middle Rio Grande, that bosque, those trees, all the invasive species, the salt cedars and the Chinese elms and the Russian olives, and it just as overgrown as it is, that riparian zone is using more water in the middle Rio Grande than is being delivered to the farmers. If we're short on compact deliveries, that water is being used by invasive species. That our debt could be paid pretty quickly by that, and we're using some hundreds of thousands of acre feet of water every year to grow this riparian zone, and all we get for it is fuel for a forest fire. Every spring, there's a fire that starts, burns down a few houses, burns down some people's equipment, and it costs millions of dollars to put the fires out. I think that's, policy-wise, that's the place to start. Instead of fighting over, what's left of the water, how do we allocate that? There's water there to deliver, and it's being used to grow a forest fire.
I totally agree with Troy. When this past spring, the river was just bank to bank, and they were just, a couple of the farmers were scared that it was gonna bust those levees. And I sat there and I stopped counting after a few weeks about how much water just sat in the banks of that river, and just, mosquitoes were outrageous, Lyme disease. I mean, there's just so many. Why couldn't we just, evaporation? My degree's in theoretical mathematics, and I couldn't find a formula to figure out what was going on there. So being more effective and efficient, I think that's the road that we need to really get down and figure out what we can do to deliver that water down there. I'm sure Texas would love to see that river flow a little bit better too.
And as far as being efficient too, us as farmers, we don't want to see necessarily wildlife or ecosystems attacked. What we want to see is the river running longer and longer durations and recharging our aquifer. And we're not necessarily trying to attack these ecosystems. We're just trying to find ways to be more efficient. And I would say we don't want to do anything detrimental, but we just want to become more efficient. And how can we do that collectively, working with the different organizations in order to make everybody happier? I think in consensus, the best route to help the ecosystem is to keep water running in that river as long as possible. And the more efficient we are, we should be able to increase the duration and keep that river full. And that's what we need to push for.
All right, maybe one more. I'll do one more question, and then maybe we'll have a chance for the audience to ask something. So I guess you've kind of all touched on some of the policy stuff, but yeah, curious in terms of state agencies or federal agencies and policymakers, just anything that you would ask them to look into, or any ideas for that. And then, we have last year, the state legislature passed the Water Security Planning Act. So we're going to be starting regional planning throughout the state. So I'm curious, just as they do that, what are the best ways to maybe involve the agricultural community and to kind of support their needs?
For water security, I've met with a couple of different people looking at some, particularly in one of my farms, I privately own one of the flood control dams that's on the farm. And they're wanting to do some extensive work in order to, instead of just whenever that dam gets full, to just release it into the river and then it ends up just going down to Texas. We don't have an effective way to capture that water and return it to either the aquifer or hold some of it in order to be useful. And I think that some of those securing acts, some of the proposals that they've had look really good. I think that a lot of our flood control areas, need some work, and maybe we could collectively work with the farmers and the communities in order to utilize that water. Whereas as soon as it comes in, how when floods happen, you get a 3-inch rain that only happens once a year. that those dams fill up and you're afraid of another rain. So you just try to get that water out as fast as possible, release it into the river, and that water's not utilized. And I think that we could work with our agencies in order to be more conscientious about that water when we do get it, because it is few and far between, and be able to use it in the areas that it's at. I think that would be beneficial.
Couple of things. What do we have, or what's most important? What do we have control over? And how can we be more effective and efficient in doing so? So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things out here we spoke of that we don't have control over, but there are a lot of things we do have control over. And what are the most important of those? And how do we become more effective and efficient in doing that?
One thing I forgot to mention earlier, when Axton started talking about flood control. So I'm also a county commissioner in Valencia County, and we're working on putting together a flood commission and doing through Valencia County. There's very little flood control that's ever been done. We're going to build some dams and try to collect some of that flood water, because how it is now, you get a big rain, it just causes damage, and there's a lot of water there to be utilized. If you can dam it up and put it into the irrigation system, use it to irrigate or use it to pay compact debt, because that side flood water is not that is not compact water. It is in New Mexico, the water is measured up north at the Ottawa gauge. So if we get some coming in from the side in a summer rain, that's free water. We get to either use it for irrigation or get it in the river and get it moved down to Elephant Butte to help pay that debt. And I think that's a really important place to find some of this efficiency, find some water to help us out,
Great. I'll guess I'll just have a chance if anyone if you have any final thoughts you just would like to present before, and then otherwise we'll open it up to the audience.
Thank you for the opportunity for us to sit
Thank you.
and have a conversation. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Couple questions.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you for being up here, and thank you for the thoughts that you put forward with this. I'll tell you, as an old farm boy, as a professional engineer, and a politician, one of the people that are making your life holy hell.
I'm one of them too. It's okay.
I appreciate what you guys have to say. And if we had more people like you and your voices on these boards and on these committees, less nonprofits, less special interests, less bureaucrats, and actually a bureaucratic system that worked, we'd be amazed at how well we could do what we do. I just appreciate the effort and your continual fight for what you do. Thank you.
If I could add just one thing, thank you for that. With our tractor rally that Troy and I and a few others started, and we had over 100 tractors that went down to MRGCD at the beginning. We did start an association called Farmers for Future Farmers. I am the president of that, and we are trying to educate, just as we're doing here, educate the community about what farmers really do. I mean, I can't tell you how many times people tell me, he says, why don't you just go down to Smith's and get some beef down there? I mean, they're selling it there. And it's interesting how many people actually believe that now. And it's because of gentlemen like these and farmers, not just here, but that we do supply food and economic stability for a lot of the families.
I think I'm next. Thank you. Really interesting panel. Thank you all, gentlemen, for stepping up. Troy, I heard you say you have pecans.
Yes.
I'm interested in your ideas of policy suggestions that could help encourage the growth of higher value crop. I know we're in the Middle Valley, less so down below Elephant Butte. In the Middle Valley, mostly alfalfa. So there could be, and I understand the problem of the lack of reliability of the water supply towards that, but I'm interested in your suggestions for what might be done to encourage more high-value crop.
You know, if we could get to where the water supply is more reliable, which certainly help. A big thing about pecans, especially in the Middle Valley, is that the weather is not quite right for it. We are in 15 years into an experiment here to see if pecan trees will make it. It looks like it's going to work.
So what's wrong about it? We do get the freezes you need, right?
It's a late frost that gets them almost every time. An April freeze it'll freeze the catkins, which are the male flowers, or you get a little. If it's a little later, you'll freeze the female flowers, and there's no nuts. It's the same issue that we have here with fruit trees. A lot of fruit trees in this valley, they produce once every 4 or 5 years or something, just because of the late frost. And the variety we planted was a big part of that. We planted Pawnees, and they come out a little bit later and they come off earlier. But there's other things to do. The other high value crops, produce. The problem we have here is labor. We can't find enough people to pick. Glenn Duggins he's down there in Socorro, Limitar area. He quit growing chili because he can't get it picked. He made a lot of money doing that, but the last couple of years he just couldn't get enough labor to pick the chili. It does not exist here, and I'm not sure policy-wise how you fix that. It's a difficult thing to do. When you get down Doña Ana County and down there closer to the border, there are labor contractors that bring them across the border every day. When you go to pick onions, I don't know if you guys are doing it in Las Cruces yet, but I know out there in Deming, they've moved to mostly mechanical. Saves a lot of labor, but if you're picking onions by hand, which is kind of what you have to do to get the high quality, not tear them up, it's unreal how many people are there on that day to pick onions. Hundreds on a 20-acre field. I mean, there's an army out there, and they have to be there that day. It requires contract labor like that, and I don't know how we do that here.
You're looking at the endangered species are up there on that platform, and the human infrastructure. I'm biased because I was on Gary's dad's master committee and we've worked for the Soil Conservation Service for many years, and the Franzois have been my mentors. The whole family, going back generations. They came here in the 1890s to work in Silver City. The Richardsons were up in Tucumcari. These people welcomed me because I was with the Soil Conservation Service. It was a bottom-up structured organization. We got our guidance from the Soil and Water Conservation District. I am what I am because I was allowed 15 years after I got my piled higher, deeper post-hole digger degree to go out in the field and work, as mainly with well drillers. I learned more from farmers and well drillers than that academic stuff was a learner's permit, like a 16-year-old learning to drive. I've been learning to drive ever since, and I owe the Franzois and the Richardsons and the Garcias, people like that, their experience, and that's human infrastructure. That's what we have to preserve in this space, in this area.
Alas, I think our water supply is getting less reliable, not more, and I don't think that's going to change. That means there will be some good years in terms of water supply and bad years, but it's getting harder to predict on an annual basis. But that's something we could do a lot of research on. I spent an academic career doing such research with, if I want to be generous, saying limited success. My question is, could you use, if we could come up with better snowmelt runoff forecasts months in advance, or better summer rainfall forecasts months in advance, is that information that would actually be actionable for you at the farm scale, or do you just need to be stuck with whatever allocations you get from somebody managing MRGCD or EBID or some irrigation district? Would better seasonal and interannual water supply forecasts change the way you operate your farms? Thanks.
I think it absolutely would, especially if the infrastructure is there to deliver that water efficiently. You know, to store it or deliver it, whatever, to get it to us when we need it, instead of, you know, if the runoff, if it starts warming up and the water's melting in March, we'd like some water then, but we'd like to keep some till September. You know, it's, for example, alfalfa, you know, really the time to plant alfalfa is about September 15th to October 1st. If the runoff is gone and there's no storage and we're out of water by July, the only other option is to try to plant alfalfa in March and April. And that is a miserable fight to plant alfalfa while the weeds are trying to grow. It's a really hard thing to get that stuff to come up clean. So if we did know there was water and we could use it, absolutely it would be helpful.
Okay. I was wondering, I know that the new farm bill has been being passed. Do you feel like there's been a lot of legislation for conserving water in New Mexico? Like, do you feel like there's been enough, or would you guys advocate for more conserving wise for New Mexico?
As far as legislation, a lot of the practices that we've implemented on our farm, you know, we've done and paid for ourselves. You know, we've gotten a little bit of help from the NRCS on certain farms, you know, kind of getting drip irrigation in and being more efficient. So I do thank NRCS for working with us on those few projects that we did. But as far as other legislation, I mean, I don't really know of many other programs or what's out there. A lot of us are, you know, spending a lot of money and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and time and effort to get this done on our own, because, you know, farmers are pretty resilient people and we've been doing it a long time and we just kind of find a way to do it. As far as a lot of other legislation that I personally don't know, I don't want to speak for everybody, but I don't see a whole lot of other programs kind of promoting those type of resources and infrastructure in order to help us, you know, conserve water. If that does answer your question. I do feel like there is a slight lack of it. I think there could be more in these desperate times for sure.
Thank you.
And I think it's important to be careful what kind of legislation. Seems a large portion of the population, they have the sentiment that that farmers are using water that really should be for municipalities, or that really for other purposes. There was an article in the journal this summer. It was some political action committee out of Washington, D.C. that was demonizing farming in New Mexico, saying that alfalfa and pecans and dairy farmers were the worst culprits of wasting water, and they were using bad data. They had some data that was maybe technically true, but for example, the first part of that article said that agriculture in New Mexico uses 80% of the fresh water. I don't believe that to be true. I believe if you went to the state engineer's office and looked at paper water rights probably 80% of the water rights are marked as agricultural. But the only other two categories are municipal and industrial users. But there is no water rights allocated to environmental opinion, you know, silvery minnow or southwest willow flycatcher or any of those. The water they're using is agricultural water. There's no water rights allocated to the riparian zone, to the cottonwood trees and the invasive species in the river. All of that water is agriculture water that's getting used. You know, municipal and industrial users, their water's metered. They have, that is usually it's groundwater. There is, the city of Albuquerque does use some surface water, but those water rights are metered and accounted for. Everything else is agricultural, and all of the river losses, all the water that's released for any environmental, you know, endangered species, any habitat stuff, the wetlands that are being maintained along the low flow conveyance channel down south of Socorro there, all of that water is ag water, and frankly, it's being stolen.
I had a question, or I have a question and a statement, which is, first, I wanted to thank you guys because I really appreciate seeing working men who look like or are similar to the ones that I've seen in my own life or in my own community, and that they get to talk to us today and tell us their experience. I also wanted to know because I know that kids are not supposed to be like working, I don't know, like there's labor laws, you know what I'm saying? But I'm just asking you, do you see any help from teens? I just mean, like, how can teens help with this? Because I feel like a huge issue is not having enough hands to take care of, you know, our agricultural needs. And I feel like, I mean, I know I got a pair of hands, you know what I'm saying? So what do you guys think we can do?
So in our family business, we own a onion packing facility. And whenever I was growing up, you know, and I'm only 30, whenever I was about 10, 15, everybody that worked in that shed was from the high school or middle school. And as of now, most of my employees in that onion facility are the H-2A guest worker program, where I bring them in from Mexico legally. I get them visas, I feed them, I house them, and transport them to and from work. And the reason I had to contort to that is because I can't get anybody from the high schools to work anymore. And I think the biggest message that I can give is people need to, you know, get back to work and not get so absolved into social media and other activities. I mean, everybody needs to learn to work. And I don't want to say that coming off as rude, but, you know, this country, it needs young people to step up and work and get a good job. And I think that doesn't just help the agricultural community, but that helps everybody. We need to roll up our sleeves and get back to work. Good point.
Okay.
I grew up as a child laborer on my father's property, and it's still there today. And it didn't hurt me. It didn't kill me. But I think he's right. We need to roll up our sleeves, put our phone down, and there's life out there besides this smartphone, iPhone.
My thought on all of that is it's in this country, it's gotten way too easy. You know, everybody used to work because there was, if you didn't, you might starve to death. Nobody can starve to death anymore in this country, so it's really hard to find somebody to work.
Max, I guess that concludes the questions. Do you want to close out your panel?
Sure. Well, thank you all for sharing, and yeah, appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Well, that concludes our meeting. And the great thing is our original title was going to be "And New Mexico is a Colorado River Basin State." And I think we've answered definitively. The answer is yes. Final thanks to our Water Conference Advisory Committee, the Water Institute staff, our speakers, and you, our wonderful audience. And have safe travels to your homes and destinations today. Thank you, everybody.